Chapter 38 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 38. During the next fortnight Sarah came several times to the King's Head. She came in about 9 in the evening, and stayed for half an hour or more. The ostensible object of her visit was to see Esther, but she declined to come into the private bar, where they would have chatted comfortably, and remained in the public bar listening to the men's conversation, listening and nodding while old John explained the horse's staying power to her. On the following evening all her interest was in Ketley. She wanted to know if anything had happened that might be considered as an omen. She said she had dreamt about the race, but her dream was only a lot of foolish rubbish without head or tail. Ketley argued earnestly against this view of a serious subject, and in the hope of convincing her of her error offered to walk as far as Oxford Street with her and put her into her 'bus. But on the following evening all her interest was centred in Mr. Journeyman, who declared that he could prove that according to the weight it seemed to him to look more and more like a certainty. He had let the horse in at 6 stone 10 pounds. The official handicapper had only given him 6 stone 7 pounds. "They is sending off him along this week, and if the leg don't go it is £100 to a brass farthing on the old horse." "How many times will they gallop him?" Sarah asked. "He goes a mile and a half every day now. The day after tomorrow they'll try him, just to see that he hasn't lost his turn of speed, and if he don't break down in the trial you can take it from me that it will be all right." "When will you know the result of the trial?" "I expect a letter on Friday morning," said Stack. "If you come in the evening I'll let you know about it." "Thank you very much, Mr. Stack. I must be getting home now." "I'm going your way, Miss Tucker. If you like we'll go together, and I'll tell you," he whispered, "all about the 'orse." When they had left the bar the conversation turned on racing as an occupation for women. "Fancy my wife making a book on the course. I bet she'd overlay it and then turn round and back the favourite at a shorter price than she'd been laying." "I don't know that we should be any foolisher than you," said Esther. "Don't you never go and overlay your book? What about syntax and the 'orse you told me about last week?" William had been heavily hit last week through overlaying his book against a horse he didn't believe in, and the whole bar joined in the laugh against him. "I don't say nothing about bookmaking," said Journeyman, "but there's a great many women nowadays who is mighty sharp at spotting a 'orse that the handicapper had let in pretty easy." "There's one," said Ketley, jerking his thumb up in the direction that Stack and Sarah had gone, "seems to have got hold of something." "We must ask Stack when he comes back," and Journeyman winked at William. "Women do get excited over trifles," old John remarked sarcastically. "She ain't got above half a crown on the horse, if that. She don't care about the horse or the race. No woman ever did. It's all about some sweetheart that's been piling it on." "I wonder if you're right," said Esther reflectively. "I never knew her before to take such an interest in a horse race." On the day of the race Sarah came into the private bar about 3 o'clock. The news was not yet in. "Wouldn't you like to step into the parlour? You'd be more comfortable," said Esther. "No, thank you, dear. It's not worth while. I thought I'd like to know which one, that's all." "Have you much on?" "No, 5 shillings altogether. But a friend of mine stands to win a good bit. I see you've got a new dress, dear. When did you get it?" I've had the stuff by me some time. I only had it made up last month. Do you like it?" Sarah answered that she thought it very pretty, but Esther could see that she was thinking of something quite different. "The race is over now. It's run at 2:30." "Yes, but they're never quite punctual. There may be a delay at the post." "I see you know all about it." "One never hears of anything else." Esther asked Sarah when her people came back to town, and was surprised at the change of expression that the question brought to her friend's face. "They're expected back to morrow," she said. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, nothing. Something to say, that's all." The conversation paused, and the two women looked at each other. At that moment a voice coming rapidly towards them was heard calling, "Winner! Winner!" "I'll send out for the paper," said Esther. "No, no, suppose he shouldn't have won?" "Well, it won't make any difference." "Oh, Esther!" "No, some one will come in and tell us. The race can't be over yet. It's a long race and takes some time to run." By this time the boy was far away, and fainter the terrible word "Winner! Winner! Winner!" "It's too late now," said Sarah. "Some one'll come in presently and tell us about it. I dare say it ain't the paper at all. Them boys cries out anything that will sell." "Winner! Winner!" The voice was coming towards them. "If he's won, Bill is to marry. Somehow I feel as if he hasn't." "Winner!" "We shall soon know." Esther took a halfpenny from the till. "Don't you think we'd better wait? It can't be printed in the papers, not the true account, and if it was wrong?" Esther didn't answer. She gave Charles the halfpenny. He went out, and in a few minutes came back with the paper in his hand. "Tornado first, Ben Jonson second, Woodcraft third," he read out. "That's a good thing for the governor. There was very few that backed Tornado. He's only lost some place money." "So he was only second," Sarah said, turning deadly pale. "They said he was certain to win." "I hope you've not lost much," said Esther. "It wasn't with William that you backed him?" "No, it wasn't with William. I only had a few shillings on. It don't matter. Let me have a drink." "What will you have?" "Some whisky." Sarah drank it neat. Esther looked at her doubtfully. The bars would be empty for the next 2 hours. Esther wished to utilize this time. She had some shopping to do, and asked Sarah to come with her. But Sarah complained of being tired, and said she would see her when she came back. Esther went out a little perplexed. She was detained longer than she expected, and when she returned Sarah was staggering about in the barroom, asking Charles for one more drink. "Oh, bloody rot! Who says I'm drunk? I ain't. Look at me. The 'orse did not win, did he? I say it did. Papers all so much bloody rot." "Oh, Sarah, what is this?" "Who's this? Leave go, I say." "Mr. Stack, won't you ask her to come upstairs? Don't encourage her." "Upstairs? I'm a free woman. I don't want to go upstairs. I'm a free woman, tell me," she said, balancing herself with difficulty and staring at Esther with dull, fishy eyes. "Tell me if I'm not a free woman. What do I want upstairs for?" "Oh, Sarah, come upstairs and lie down. Don't go out." "I'm going home. Hands off, hands off," she said, slapping Esther's hands from her arm. "Everyone was drunk last night and drunk the night before. And if we don't get drunk tonight, we don't get drunk no more. Now you will have a drink with me, and I will drink with you, for we're the very rowdiest lot of the rowdy Irish crew. That's what we used to sing in the lane, yer know. Should have seen the coaster gals with their feathers dancing and clinking their pewters. Rippin' day, bank 'oliday, Epping under the trees. Oh, they did romp, them gals. We all was roaring drunk last night, and drunk the night before, and if we don't get drunk tonight, we don't get drunk no more. Girls and boys, you know, all together. Sarah, listen to me. Listen. Come and have a drink, old girl. Just another drink. She staggered up to the counter. One more, just for luck, do you hear? Before Charles could stop her, she had seized the whisky that had just been served. That's my whisky, exclaimed Journeyman. He made a rapid movement, but was too late. Sarah had drained the glass and stood vacantly looking into space. Journeyman seemed so disconcerted at the loss of his whisky that everyone laughed. A few moments after, Sarah staggered forward and fell insensible into his arms. He and Esther carried her upstairs and laid her on the bed in the spare room. "She'll be precious bad to-morrow," said Journeyman. "I don't know how you could have gone on helping her," Esther said to Charles when she got inside the bar, and she seemed so pained that out of deference to her feelings the subject was dropped out of the conversation. Esther felt that something shocking had happened. Sarah had deliberately got drunk. She would not have done that unless she had some great trouble on her mind. William, too, was of this opinion. Something serious must have happened. As they went up to their room, Esther said, "It's all the fault of this betting. The neighbourhood is completely ruined. They're losing their homes and their furniture, and you'll bear the blame of it." "It do make me so wild to hear you talking that way, Esther. People will bet, you can't stop them. I'll lay fair prices, and they're sure of their money. Yet you says they're losing their furniture, and that I shall have to bear the blame." When they got to the top of the stairs, she said, "I must go and see how Sarah is." "Where am I? What's happened? Take that candle out of my eyes. Oh, my head is that painful." She fell back on the pillow, and Esther thought she had gone to sleep again. But she opened her eyes. "Where am I? That's you, Esther?" "Yes. Can't you remember?" "No, I can't. I remember that the horse didn't win, but don't remember nothing after. I got drunk, didn't I? It feels like it." "The horse didn't win, and then you took too much. It's very foolish of you to give way." "Give way? Drunk? What matter? I'm done for." "Did you lose much?" "It wasn't what I lost, it was what I took. I gave Bill the plate to pledge. It's all gone, and Master and Missus coming back to-morrow. Don't talk about it. I got drunk so that I shouldn't think of it." "Oh, Sarah, I didn't think it was as bad as that. You must tell me all about it." "I don't want to think about it. They'll come soon enough to take me away. Besides, I cannot remember nothing now. My mouth that awful. Give me a drink. Never mind the glass, give me the water bottle." She drank ravenously and seemed to recover a little. Esther pressed her to tell her about the pledged plate. "You know that I'm your friend. You'd better tell me. I want to help you out of this scrape." "No one can help me now. I'm done for. Let them come and take me. I'll go with them. I shan't say nothing." "How much is it in for?" "Don't cry like that," Esther said, and she took out her handkerchief and wiped Sarah's eyes. "How much is it in for? Perhaps I can get my husband to lend me the money to get it out."
"It's no use trying to help me, Esther. I can't talk about it now. I shall go mad if I do."
"Tell me how much you got on it."
£30.
It took a long time to undress her. Every now and then she made an effort, and another article of clothing was got off. When Esther returned to her room William was asleep, and Esther took him by the shoulder. "It is more serious than I thought," she shouted. "I want to tell you about it."
"What about it?"
he said, opening his eyes. "She has pledged the plate for £30 to back that 'orse."
"What 'orse?"
"Ben Jonson."
"He broke down at the bushes. If he hadn't I should have been broke up. The whole neighbourhood was on him. So she pledged the plate to back him. She didn't do that to back him herself. Someone must have put her up to it."
"Yes, it was Bill Evans."
"Ah, that blackguard put her up to it. I thought she'd left him for good. She promised us that she'd never speak to him again."
"You see, she was that fond of him that she couldn't help herself. There's many that can't."
"How much did they get on the plate?"
£30. William blew a long whistle. Then, starting up in the bed, he said,
"She can't stop here. If it comes out that it was through betting, it won't do this house any good. We're already suspected. There's that old sweetheart of yours, the Salvation cove, on the lookout for evidence of betting being carried on."
"She'll go away in the morning, but I thought that you might lend her the money to get the plate out."
"What, £30?"
"It's a deal of money, I know, but I thought that you might be able to manage it. You've been lucky over this race."
"Yes, but think of all I've lost this summer. This is the first bit of luck I've had for a long while."
"I thought you might be able to manage it." Esther stood by the bedside, her knee leaned against the edge. She seemed to him at that moment as the best woman in the world, and he said,
£30 is no more to me than twopence halfpenny if you wish it, Esther."
"I haven't been an extravagant wife, have I?" she said, getting into bed and taking him in her arms. "I never asked you for money before. She's my friend. She's yours too. We've known her all our lives. We can't see her go to prison, can we, Bill, without raising a finger to save her?" She had never called him Bill before, and the familiar abbreviation touched him, and he said,
"I owe everything to you, Esther. Everything that's mine is yours."
"But," he said, drawing away so that he might see her better,
"What do you say if I ask something of you?"
"What are you going to ask me?"
"I want to say that you won't bother me no more about the betting. You was brought up to think it wicked. I know all that, but you see we can't do without it."
"Do you think not?"
"Don't the £30 you're asking for Sarah come out of betting?"
"I suppose it do."
"Most certainly it do."
"I can't help feeling, Bill, that we shan't always be so lucky as we have been."
"You mean that you think that one of these days we shall have the police down upon us?"
"Don't you sometimes think that we can't always go on without being caught? Every day I hear of the police being down on some betting club or other."
"They've been down on a great number lately, but what can I do? We always come back to that. I haven't the health to work round from racecourse to racecourse as I used to. But I've got an idea, Esther. I've been thinking over things a great deal lately, and give me my pipe. There, it's just by you. Now hold the candle, like a good girl."
William pulled at his pipe until it was fully lighted. He threw himself on his back, and then he said,
"I've been thinking things over. The betting has brought us a nice bit of trade here. If we can work up the business a bit more we might, let's say in a year from now, be able to get as much for the house as we gave. What do you think of buying a business in the country, a house, doing a steady trade? I've had enough of London. The climate don't suit me as it used to. I fancy I should be much better in the country, somewhere on the south coast, Bournemouth way. What do you think?"
Before Esther could reply, William was taken with a fit of coughing, and his great broad frame was shaken as if it were so much paper. "I'm sure," said Esther, when he had recovered himself a little, "that a good deal of your trouble comes from that pipe. It's never out of your mouth. I feel like choking myself."
"I dare say I smoke too much. I'm not the man I was. I can feel it plain enough. Put my pipe down and blow out the candle. I didn't ask you how Sarah was."
"Very bad. She was half dazed and didn't tell me much."
"She didn't tell you where she had pledged the plate?"
"No. I will ask her about that to morrow morning." Leaning forward, she blew out the candle. The wick smouldered red for a moment, and they fell asleep happy in each other's love, seeming to find new bonds of union in pity for their friend's misfortune. End of chapter 38. Read by Lars Rolander.
Chapter 39 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bridget Gage. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 39. "Sarah, you must make an effort and try to dress yourself." "Oh, I do feel that bad I wish I was dead." "You must not give way like that. Let me help you put on your stockings." Sarah looked at Esther. "You are very good to me, but I can manage." When she had drawn on her stockings, her strength was exhausted, and she fell back on the pillow. Esther waited a few minutes. "Here are your petticoats. Just tie them round you. I'll lend you a dressing gown and a pair of slippers." William was having breakfast in the parlour. "Well, feeling a bit poorly?" he said to Sarah. "What'll you have? There's a nice bit of fried fish. Not feeling up to it?" "Oh, no, I couldn't touch anything." She let herself drop on the sofa. "A cup of tea'll do you good," said Esther. "You must have a cup of tea, and a bit of toast, just to nibble. William, pour her out a cup of tea." When she had drunk the tea, she said she felt a little better. "Now," said William, "let's 'ear all about it. Esther has told you, no doubt, that we intend to do all we can to help you." "You can't help me. I'm done for," she replied dolefully. "I don't know about that," said William. "You gave that brute, Bill Evans, the plate to pawn, so far as I know." "There isn't much more to tell. He said the horse was sure to win. He was at 30-1 at that time. 1,000 to 30. Bill said with that money we could buy a public house in the country. He wanted to settle down. He wanted to get out of I don't want to say nothing against him. He said if I would only give him this chance of leading a respectable life, we was to be married immediately after." He told you all that, did he? He said he'd give you a 'ome of your own? I know. A regular rotter. That man is about as bad as they make 'em. And you believed it all." "It wasn't so much what I believed as what I couldn't help myself. He had got that influence over me that my will wasn't my own. I don't know how it is. I suppose men have stronger natures than women. I 'ardly knew what I was doing. It was like sleep-walking. He looked at me and said, 'You'd better do it.' I did it, and I suppose I'll have to go to prison for it. What I says is just the truth. But no one believes tales like that. How long do you think they'll give me?" "I hope we shall be able to get you out of this scrape. You got £30 on the plate. Esther has told you that I'm ready to lend you the money to get it out." "Will you do this? You are good friends indeed. But I shall never be able to pay you back such a lot of money." "We won't say nothing about paying back. All we want you to do is to say that you'll never see that fellow again." A change of expression came over Sarah's face, and William said, "You're surely not still hankering after him?" "No, indeed I'm not. But whenever I meets him he somehow gets his way with me. It's terrible to love a man as I love him. I know he don't really care for me. I know he is all you say, and yet I can't help myself. It is better to be honest with you." William looked puzzled. At the end of a long silence he said, "If it's like that I don't see that we can do anything." "Have patience, William. Sarah don't know what she's saying. She'll promise not to see him again." "You're very kind to me. I know I'm very foolish. I promised before not to see him, and I couldn't keep my promise." "You can stop with us until you get a situation in the country," said Esther, "where you'll be out of his way." "I might do that." "I don't like to part with my money," said William, "if it is to do no one any good." Esther looked at him, and he added, "It is just as Esther wishes, of course. I'm not giving you the money, it is she." "It is both of us," said Esther. "You'll do what I said, Sarah?" "Oh, yes, anything you say, Esther." And she flung herself into her friend's arms and wept bitterly. "Now we want to know where you pawned the plate," said William. "A long way from here. Bill said he knew a place where it would be quite safe. I was to say that my mistress left it to me. He said that would be sufficient. It was in the Mile End Road." "You'd know the shop again?" said William. "But she's got the ticket," said Esther. "No, I ain't got the ticket. Bill has it." "Then I'm afraid the game's up." "Do be quiet," said Esther angrily. "If you want to get out of lending the money, say so and have done with it." "That's not true, Esther. If you want another 30 to pay him to give up the ticket, you can have it." Esther thanked her husband with one quick look. "I'm sorry," she said. "My temper is that hasty. But you know where he lives," she said, turning to the wretched woman who sat on the sofa pale and trembling. "Yes, I know where he lives, 13 Millward Square, Mile End Road." "Then we've no time to lose. We must go after him at once." "No, William dear, you must not. You'd only lose your temper, and he might do you an injury." "An injury! I'd soon show him which was the best man of the two." "I'll not hear of it, Sarah. He mustn't go with you." "Come, Esther, don't be foolish. Let me go." He had taken his hat from the peg. Esther got between him and the door. "I forbid it," she said. "I will not let you go. Perhaps to have a fight, and with that cough." William was coughing. He had turned pale, and he said, leaning against the table, "Give me something to drink, a little milk." Esther poured some into a cup. He sipped it slowly. "I'll go upstairs," she said, "for my hat and jacket. You've got your betting to attend to." William smiled. "Sarah, mind, he's not to go with you." "You forget what you said last night about the betting." "Never mind what I said last night about the betting. What I say now is that you're not to leave the bar. Come upstairs, Sarah, and dress yourself, and let's be off." Stack and Journeyman were waiting to speak to him. They had lost heavily over old Ben, and didn't know how they'd pull through. And the whole neighbourhood was in the same plight. The bar was filled with gloomy faces. And as William scanned their disconcerted faces, clerks, hairdressers, waiters from the innumerable eating houses, he could not help thinking that perhaps more than one of them had taken money that did not belong to them back to Ben Jonson. The unexpected disaster had upset all their plans, and even the wary ones who had a little reserve fund could not help backing outsiders, hoping by the longer odds to retrieve yesterday's losses. At 2 the bar was empty, and William waited for Esther and Sarah to return from Mile End. It seemed to him that they were a long time away. But Mile End is not close to Soho, and when they returned, between 4 and 5, he saw at once that they had been unsuccessful. He lifted up the flap in the counter, and all three went into the parlour. "He left Millward Square yesterday," Esther said. "Then we went to another address, and then to another. We went to all the places Sarah had been to with him, but no tidings anywhere." Sarah burst into tears. "There's no more hope," she said. "I'm done for. They'll come and take me away. How much do you think I'll get? They won't give me 10 years, will they?" "I can see nothing else for you to do," said Esther, "but to go straight back to your people and tell them the whole story, and throw yourself on their mercy." "Do you mean that she should say that she pawned the plate to get money to back a horse?" "Of course I do." "It will make the police more keen than ever on the betting houses." "That can't be helped." "She'd better not be took here," said William. "It will do a great deal of harm. It don't make no difference to her where she's took, do it?" Esther did not answer. "I'll go away. I don't want to get no one into trouble," Sarah said, and she got up from the sofa. At that moment Charles opened the door and said, "You're wanted in the bar, sir." William went out quickly. He returned a moment after. There was a scared look on his face. "They're here," he said. He was followed by 2 policemen. Sarah uttered a little cry. "Your name is Sarah Tucker?" said the first policeman. "Yes." "You're charged with robbery by Mr. Sheldon, 34, Cumberland Place." "Shall I be taken through the streets?" "If you like to pay for it, you can go in a cab," the police officer replied. "I'll go with you, dear," Esther said. William plucked her by the sleeve. "It will do no good. Why should you go?" End of chapter 39.
Chapter 40 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 40. The magistrate of course sent the case for trial, and the £30 which William had promised to give to Esther went to pay for the defence. There seemed at first some hope that the prosecution would not be able to prove its case, but fresh evidence connecting Sarah with the abstraction of the plate was forthcoming, and in the end it was thought advisable that the plea of not guilty should be withdrawn. The efforts of counsel were therefore directed towards a mitigation of sentence. Counsel called Esther and William for the purpose of proving the excellent character that the prisoner had hitherto borne. Counsel spoke of the evil influence into which the prisoner had fallen, and urged that she had no intention of actually stealing the plate. Tempted by promises, she had been persuaded to pledge the plate in order to back a horse which she had been told was certain to win. If that horse had won, the plate would have been redeemed and returned to its proper place in the owner's house, and the prisoner would have been able to marry. Possibly the marriage on which the prisoner had set her heart would have turned out more unfortunate for the prisoner than the present proceedings. Counsel had not words strong enough to stigmatize the character of a man who, having induced a girl to imperil her liberty for his own vile ends, was cowardly enough to abandon her in the hour of her deepest distress. Counsel drew attention to the trusting nature of the prisoner, who had not only pledged her employer's plate at his base instigation, but had likewise been foolish enough to confide the pawn ticket to his keeping. Such was the prisoner's story, and he submitted that it bore on the face of it the stamp of truth. A very sad story, but one full of simple, foolish, trusting humanity. And, having regard to the excellent character the prisoner had borne, counsel hoped that his lordship would see his way to dealing leniently with her. His lordship, whose gallantries had been prolonged over half a century, and whose betting transactions were matters of public comment, pursed up his ancient lips and fixed his dead glassy eyes on the prisoner. He said he regretted that he could not take the same view of the prisoner's character as learned counsel had done. The police had made every effort to apprehend the man Evans, who, according to the prisoner's story, was the principal culprit. But the efforts of the police had been unavailing. They had, however, found traces of the man Evans, who undoubtedly did exist, and need not be considered to be a near relative of our friend Mrs. Harris, and the little joke provoked some amusement in the court. Learned counsel settled their ropes becomingly, and leant forward to listen. They were in for a humorous speech, and the prisoner would get off with a light sentence. But the grim smile waxed duller, and it was clear that lordship was determined to make the law a terror to evildoers. Lordship drew attention to the fact that during the course of their investigations the police had discovered that the prisoner had been living for some considerable time with the man Evans, during which time several robberies had been effected. There was no evidence, it was true, to connect the prisoner with these robberies. The prisoner had left the man Evans and had obtained a situation in the house of her present employers. When the characters she had received from her former employers were being examined, she had accounted for the years she had spent with the man Evans by saying that she had been staying with the Latches, the publicans who had given evidence in her favour. It had also come to the knowledge of the police that the man Evans used to frequent the King's Head, that was the house owned by the Latches. It was probable that she had made there the acquaintance of the man Evans. The prisoner had referred her employers to the Latches, who had lent their sanction to the falsehood regarding the year she was supposed to have spent with them, but which she had really spent in cohabitation with a notorious thief. Here lordship indulged in severe remarks against those who enable not fully irreproachable characters to obtain situations by false pretences, a very common habit, and one attended with great danger to society, one which society would do well to take precautions to defend itself against. The plate, his lordship remarked, was said to have been pawned, but there was nothing to show that it had been pawned, the prisoner's explanation being that she had given the pawn ticket to the man Evans. She could not tell where she had pawned the plate, her tale being that she and the man Evans had gone down to Whitechapel together and pawned it in the Mile End Road, but she did not know the number of the pawnbrokers, nor could she give any indications as to its whereabouts. Beyond the mere fact that it was in the Mile End Road she could say nothing. All the pawnbrokers in the Mile End Road had been searched, but no plate answering to the description furnished by the prosecution could be found. Learned counsel had endeavoured to show that it had been in a measure unpremeditated, that it was the result of a passing but irresistible temptation. Learned counsel had endeavoured to introduce some element of romance into the case. He had described the theft as the outcome of the prisoner's desire of marriage, but lordship could not find such purity of motive in the prisoner's crime. There was nothing to show that there was any thought of marriage in the prisoner's mind. The crime was the result not of any desire of marriage, but rather the result of vicious passion, concubinage. Regarding the plea that the crime was unpremeditated, it was only necessary to point out that it had been committed for a distinct purpose, and had been carried out in conjunction with an accomplished thief.
There is now only one more point which I wish to refer to, and that is the plea that the prisoner did not intend to steal the plate, but only to obtain money upon it to enable her and the partner in her guilt to back a horse for a race which they believed to be. His lordship was about to say a certainty for him. He stopped himself, however, in time. To be which they believed him to be capable of winning. The race in question is, I think, called the XXXIX, and the name of the horse. Lordship had lost 300 on Ben Jonson. If my memory serves me right, here Lordship fumbled amid papers. Yes, the name is, as I thought, Ben Jonson. Now the learned counsel for the defence suggested that if the horse had won, the plate would have been redeemed and restored to its proper place in the pantry cupboards. This, I venture to point out, is a mere hypothesis. The money might have been again used for the purpose of gambling. I confess that I do not see why we should condone the prisoner's offence because it was committed for the sake of obtaining money for gambling purposes. Indeed, it seems to me a reason for dealing heavily with the offence. The vice among the poorer classes is largely on the increase, and it seems to me that it is the duty of all in authority to condemn rather than to condone the evil, and to use every effort to stamp it out. For my part, I fail to perceive any romantic element in the vice of gambling. It springs from the desire to obtain wealth without work, in other words, without payment. Work, whether in the past or the present, is the natural payment for wealth, and any wealth that is obtained without work is in a measure a fraud committed upon the community. Poverty, despair, idleness, and every other vice springs from gambling as naturally and in the same profusion as weeds from barren land. Drink, too, is gambling's firmest ally.
At this moment a certain dryness in his lordship's throat reminded him of the pint of excellent claret that lordship always drank with his lunch, and the thought enabled lordship to roll out some excellent invective against the evils of beer and spirits. And lordship's losses on the horse, whose name he could hardly recall, helped to a forcible illustration of the theory that drink and gambling mutually uphold and enforce each other. When the news that Ben Jonson had broken down at the Bushes came in, lordship had drunk a magnum of champagne, and memory of this champagne inspired a telling description of the sinking feeling consequent on the loss of a wager, and the natural inclination of a man to turn to drink to counteract it. Drink and gambling are growing social evils. In a great measure they are circumstantial, and only require absolute legislation to stamp them out almost entirely. This was not the first case of the kind that had come before him. It was one of many, but it was a typical case, presenting all the familiar features of the vice of which he had therefore spoken at unusual length. Such cases were on the increase, and if they continued to increase, the powers of the law would have to be strengthened. But even as the law stood at present, betting houses, public houses in which betting was carried on, were illegal, and it was the duty of the police to leave no means untried to unearth the offenders and bring them to justice. Lordship then glanced at the trembling woman in the dock. He condemned her to 18 months' hard labour, and gathering up the papers on the desk, dismissed her for ever from his mind. The court adjourned for lunch, and Esther and William edged their way out of the crowd of lawyers and their clerks. Neither spoke for some time. William was much exercised by his lordship's remarks on betting public houses, and his advice that the police should increase their vigilance and leave no means untried to uproot that which was the curse and the ruin of the lower classes. It was the old story, one law for the rich, another for the poor. William did not seek to probe the question any further.
This examination seemed to him to have exhausted it, and he remembered after all that the hypocritical judge had said how difficult it would be to escape detection. When he was caught he would be fined £100, and probably lose his licence. What would he do then? He did not confide his fears to Esther. She had promised to say no more about the betting, but she had not changed her opinion. She was one of those stubborn ones who would rather die than admit they were wrong. Then he wondered what she thought of his lordship's speech. Esther was thinking of the thin gruel Sarah would have to eat, the plank bed on which she would have to sleep, and the miserable future that awaited her when she should be released from jail. It was a bright winter's day. The city folk were walking rapidly, tightly buttoned up in top coats, and in a windy sky a flock of pigeons floated on straightened wings above the telegraph wires. Fleet Street was full of journalists going to luncheon bars and various eating houses. Their hurry and animation were remarkable, and Esther noticed how laggard was William's walk by comparison, how his clothes hung loose about him, and the sharp air was at work on his lungs, making him cough. She asked him to button himself up more closely. "Is not that old John's wife?" Esther said.
Yes, that's her, said William. She'd have seen us if that cove hadn't given her the shilling. Lord, I didn't think they was as badly off as that. Did you ever see such rags, and that thick leg wrapped up in that awful stocking?
The morning had been full of sadness, and Mrs. Randall's wandering rags had seemed to Esther like a foreboding. She grew frightened, as the cattle do in the fields when the sky darkens and the storm draws near. She suddenly remembered Mrs. Barfield, and she heard it telling her of the unhappiness that she had seen come from betting. Where was Mrs. Barfield? Should she ever see her again? Mrs. Barfield was dead. Miss May was forced to live abroad for the sake of her health. All that time of long ago was over and done with. Some words that Mrs. Barfield had said came back to her. She had never quite understood them, but she had never quite forgotten them. They seemed to chime through her life. "My girl," Mrs. Barfield had said, "I'm more than 20 years older than you, and I assure you that time has passed like a dream. Life is nothing. We must think of what comes after."
Cheer up, old girl. 18 months is a long while, but it ain't a lifetime. She'll get through it all right, and when she comes out we'll try to see what we can do for her.
William's voice startled Esther from the depth of her dream. She looked at him vaguely, and he saw that she had been thinking of something different from what he had suspected.
"I thought it was on account of Sarah that you was looking so sad."
"No," she said, "I was not thinking of Sarah." Then, taking it for granted that she was thinking of the wickedness of betting, his face darkened. It was aggravating to have a wife who was always troubling about things that couldn't be helped. The first person they saw on entering the bar was old John, and he sat in the corner of the bar on a high stool, his grey, death-like face sunk in the old, unstarched shirt collar. The thin, wrinkled throat was hid with the remains of a cravat. It was passed twice round and tied according to the fashions of 50 years ago. His boots were broken. The trousers, a grey, dirty brown, were torn as high up as the ankle. They had been mended, and the patches hardly held together. The frock coat, green with age, with huge flaps over the pockets, frayed and torn, and many sizes too large, hung upon his starveling body. He seemed very feeble, and there was neither light nor expression in his glassy, watery eyes.
18 months, a devil of a stiff sentence for a first offence, said William.
I just dropped in. Charles said you're sure to be back. You're later than I expected." "We stopped to have a bit of lunch, but you heard what I said. She got 18 months." "Who got 18 months?" "Sarah." "Ah, Sarah. She was trying to die, so she got 18 months." "What's the matter? Wake up. You're half asleep. What will you have to drink?" "A glass of milk, if you've got such a thing." "Glass of milk. What is it, old man? Not feeling well?" "Not very well. The fact is I'm starving." "Starving? Then come into the parlour and have something to eat. Why didn't you say so before?" "I didn't like to." He led the old chap into the parlour and gave him a chair. "Didn't like to tell me that you was as hard up as all that? What do you mean? You didn't use to mind coming round for half a quid?" "That was to back a horse, but I didn't like coming to ask for food. Excuse me, I'm too weak to speak much." When old John had eaten, William asked how it was that things had gone so badly with him. "I've had terrible bad luck lately. Can't get on a winner nohow. I have backed horses that has been tried to win with 2 stone more on their backs than they had to carry, but just because I was on them they didn't win. I don't know how many half crowns I've had on first favourites. Then I tried the second favourites, but they gave way to outsiders or the first favourites when I took to backing them. Stack's Tips and Ketley's Omens was all the same as far as I was concerned. It's a poor business when you're out of luck." "It is giving way to fancy that does for the backers. The bookmaker's advantage is that he bets on principle and not on fancy." Old John told how unlucky he had been in business. He had been dismissed from his employment in the restaurant, not from any fault of his own. He had done his work well. "But they don't like old waiters. There's always a lot of young Germans about, and customers said I smelt bad. I suppose it was my clothes and want of convenience at home for keeping oneself tidy. We been so hard up to pay the 3 and 6pence rent which we owed, that the black coat and waistcoat had to go to the pawn shop. So even if I did meet with a job in the exhibition places, where they ain't so particular about your age, I should not be able to take it. It is terrible to think that I should have to come to this, and after having worked round the table this 40 years. £50 a year, and all found, and accustomed always to a big footman and page boy under me. But there's plenty more like me. It's a poor game. You're well out of it. I suppose the end of it will be the workhouse. I'm pretty well wore out, and—" The old man's voice died away. He made no allusion to his wife. His dislike to speak of her was part and parcel of his dislike to speak of his private affairs. The conversation then turned on Sarah. The severity of the sentence was alluded to, and William spoke of how the judge's remarks would put the police on watch, and how difficult it would be to continue his betting business without being found out. "There's no doubt that it is most unfortunate," said old John. "The only thing for you to do is to be very particular about your introductions, and to refuse to bet with all who haven't been properly introduced." "Or to give up betting altogether," said Esther. "Give up betting altogether?" William answered, his face flustered, and he gradually worked himself into a passion. "I give you a good 'ome, don't I? You want for nothing, do yer? Well, that being so, I think you might keep your nose out of your husband's business. There's plenty of prayer meetings where you can go preaching if you like." William would have said a good deal more, but his anger brought on a fit of coughing. Esther looked at him contemptuously, and without answering she walked into the bar. "That's a bad cough of yours," said old John. "Yes," said Williams, and he drank a little water to pass it off. "I must see the doctor about it. It makes one that irritable. The missus is in a pretty temper, ain't she?" Old John did not reply. It was not his habit to notice domestic differences of opinion, especially those in which women had a share. Queer cattle that he knew nothing about. The men talked for a long time regarding the danger the judge's remark had brought the house into, and they considered all the circumstances of the case. Allusion was made to the injustice of the law, which allowed the rich and forbade the poor to bet. Anecdotes were related, but nothing they said threw new light on the matter in hand. And when old John rose to go, William summed up the situation in a few words. "Bet I must if I'm to get my living. The only thing I can do is to be careful not to bet with strangers." "I don't see how they can do nothing to you if you makes that your principle and sticks to it," said old John, and he put on the huge rimmed greasy hat, 3 sizes too large for him, looking in his square cut tattered frock coat as queer a specimen of humanity as you would be likely to meet with in a day's walk. "If you make that your principle and sticks to it," thought William. But practice and principle are never reduced to perfect agreement. One is always marauding the other's territory. Nevertheless, for several months, principle distinctly held the upper hand. William refused over and over again to make bets with comparative strangers. But the day came when his principle relaxed, and he took the money of a man whom he thought was all right. It was done on the impulse of the moment. But the 2 half-crowns, wrapped up in the paper, with the name of the horse written on the paper, had hardly gone into the drawer than he felt that he had done wrong. He couldn't tell why, but the feeling came across him that he had done wrong in taking the man's money, a tall, clean-shaven man, dressed in broadcloth. It was too late to draw back. The man had finished his beer and had left the bar, which in itself was suspicious. 3 days afterwards, between 12 and 1, just the busiest time, when the bar was full of people, there came a cry of "Police!" An effort was made to hide the betting plant. A rush was made for the doors. It was all too late. The sergeant and a constable ordered that no one was to leave the house. Other police were outside. The names and addresses of all present were taken down. Search was made, and the packets of money and the betting books were discovered. Then they all had to go to Marlborough Street. End of chapter 40. Read by Lars Rolander.
Chapter 41 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 41.
Next day the following account was given in most of the daily papers. Raid on a betting man in the West End. William Latch, 35, landlord of the King's Head, Dean Street, Soho, was charged that he, being a licensed person, did keep and use his public house for the purpose of betting with persons resorting thereto. Thomas William, 35, billiard marker, Golden Street, Battersea. Arthur Henry Parsons, 25, waiter, Northumberland Street, Marylebone. Joseph Stack, 52, gentleman. Harold Journeyman, 45, gentleman, High Street, Norwood. Philip Hutchinson, grocer, Busy Road, Fulham. William Tan, piano tuner, Standard Street, Soho. Charles Ketley, butterman, Green Street, Soho. John Randall, Friss Street, Soho. Charles Muller, 44, tailor, Marylebone Lane. Arthur Bartram, stationer, East Street Buildings. William Burton, harness maker, Blue Lion Street, Bond Street, were charged with using the King's Head for the purpose of betting. Evidence was given by the police regarding the room upstairs, where a good deal of drinking went on after hours. There had been cases of disorder, and the magistrate unfortunately remembered that a servant girl, who had pledged her master's place to obtain money to back a horse, had been arrested in the King's Head. Taking these facts into consideration, it seemed to him that he could not do less than inflict the fine of £100. The men who were found in Latch's house he ordered to be bound over. Who had first given information? That was the question. Old John sat smoking in his corner. Journeyman leaned against the yellow-painted partition, his legs thrust out. Stack stood square, his dark crimson-tinted skin contrasting with sallow-faced little Ketley. "Don't the omens throw no light on this 'ere matter?" said Journeyman. Ketley started from his reverie. "Ah," said William, "if I only knew who the bastard was." "Ain't you got no idea of any sort?" said Stack. "There was a Salvation chap who came in some months ago and told me wife that the betting was corrupting the neighbourhood, that it would have to be put a stop to. It may have been he." "You don't ask no one to bet with you. They does as they like." "Does as they like? No one does that nowadays. There's a temperance party, a purity party, and a anti-gambling party, and what they's working for is just to stop folk from doing as they like." "That's it," said Journeyman. Stack raised his glass to his lips and said, "Here's luck." "There's not much of that about," said William. "We seem to be losing all round. I'd like to know where the money goes. I think it is the 'ouse it's gone unlucky, and I'm thinking of clearing out." "We may live in a 'ouse a long while before we find what its luck really is," said Ketley. "I've been in my old 'ouse these 20 years, and it ain't nothing like what I thought it." "You are superstitious," said Journeyman. "If there was anything the matter with the 'ouse, you'd have knowed it before now." "Ain't you doing the trade you was?" said Stack. "No, my butter and egg trade have fallen dreadful lately." The conversation paused. It was Stack who broke the silence. "Do you intend to do no more betting 'ere?" he asked. "What, after being fined £100? You heard the way he went on about Sarah, and all on account of her being took here. I think he might have left Sarah out." "It warn't for betting she took the plate," said Journeyman. "It was 'cause her chap said if she did he'd marry her." "I wonder if you ever left the course," said Stack. "It was on the account of my health. I caught a dreadful cold at Kempton. Standing about in the mud, I've never quite got over that cold." I remember, said Ketley. You couldn't speak above a whisper for 2 months. 2 months, more like 3.
14 weeks, said Esther. She was in favour of disposing of the house and going to live in the country, but it was soon found that the conviction for keeping a betting house had spoiled their chance of an advantageous sale. If, however, the licence were renewed next year, and the business did not in the meantime decline, they could be in a position to obtain better terms. So all their energies should be devoted to the improvement of their business. Esther engaged another servant, and she provided the best meat and vegetables that money could buy. William ordered beers and spirits of a quality that could be produced nowhere else in the neighbourhood, but all to no purpose. As soon as it became known that it was no longer possible to pass half a crown or a shilling wrapped up in a piece of paper across the bar, the custom began to decline. At last William could stand it no longer, and he obtained his wife's permission to once more begin bookmaking on the course. His health had begun to improve with the spring weather, and there was no use keeping him at home eating his heart out with vexation because they were doing no business. So did Esther reason, and it reminded her of old times when he came back with his race glasses slung round his shoulder. "Favourites all beaten to-day. What have you got for me to eat, old girl?" Esther forgot her dislike of racing in the joy of seeing her husband happy. If he'd only pick up a bit of flesh, but he seemed to get thinner and thinner, and his food didn't seem to do him any good. One day he came home complaining that the ring was 6 inches of soft mud. He was wet to the skin, and he sat shivering the whole evening, with the sensation of a long illness upon him. He was laid up for several weeks, and his voice seemed as if it would never return to him again. There was little or no occupation for him in the bar, and instead of laying he began to take the odds. He backed a few winners, it is true, but they could not rely on that. Most of their trade had slipped from them, so it did not much matter to them if they were found out. He might as well be hung for an old sheep as a lamb, and surreptitiously at first, and then more openly, he began to take money across the bar. And with every shilling he took for a bet another shilling was spent in drink. Custom came back in ripples, and then in stronger waves, until once again the bar of the King's Head was full to overflowing. Another conviction meant ruin, but they must risk it, so said William, and Esther, like a good wife, acquiesced in her husband's decision. But he took money only from those whom he was quite sure of. He required an introduction, and was careful to make inquiries concerning every new backer. "In this way," he said to Ketley, "so long as one is content to bet on a small scale, I think it can be kept dark. But if you try to extend your connection, you're bound to come across a wrong 'un sooner or later. It was that room upstairs that did for me." "I never did think much of that room upstairs," said Ketley. "There was something about it that I didn't like. Be sure you never bet in that jug and bottle bar, whatever you do. There's just the same look there as in the room upstairs. Haven't you noticed it?" "Can't say I have, nor am I sure that I know exactly what you mean." "If you don't see it, you don't see it. But it's plain enough to me, and don't you bet with nobody standing in that bar. I wouldn't go in there for a sovereign." William laughed. He thought at first that Ketley was joking, but he soon saw that Ketley regarded the jug and bottle entrance with real suspicion. When pressed to explain, he told Journeyman that it wasn't that he was afraid of the place, he merely didn't like it. "There's some places that you likes better than others, ain't they?"
Journeyman was obliged to confess that there were. "Well, then that's one of the places I don't like. Don't you hear a voice talking there, a soft, low voice with a bit of jeer in it?" On another occasion he shaded his eyes and peered curiously into the left-hand corner. "What are you looking at?" asked Journeyman. "At nothing that you can see," Ketley answered, and he drank his whisky as if lost in consideration of grave and difficult things. A few weeks later they noticed that he always got as far from the jug and bottle entrance as possible, and he was afflicted with a long story concerning a danger that awaited him. "He's waiting, but nothing will happen if I don't go in there. He can't follow me. He's waiting for me to go to him." "Then keep out of his way," said Journeyman. "You might ask your bloody friend if he can tell us anything about the Leger." "I'm trying to keep out of his way, but he's always watching and a beckoning of me." "Can you see him now?" asked Stack. "Yes," said Ketley. "He's sitting there, and he seems to say that if I don't come to him worse will happen." "Don't say nothing to him," William whispered to Journeyman. "I don't think he's quite right in the head. He's been losing a lot lately." One day Journeyman was surprised to see Ketley sitting quite composedly in the jug and bottle bar. "He got me at last. I had to go. The whispering got so loud in my head as I was a coming down the street. I tried to get out in the middle of the street, but a drunken chap pushed me across the pavement, and he was at the door waiting, and he said, 'Now you'd better come in. You know what will happen if you don't.'" "Don't talk rot, old pal. Come round and have a drink with us." "I can't just at present. I may later on." "What do you mean?" said Stack. "Lord, I don't know," said Journeyman. "It's only his wandering talk." They tried to discuss the chances of the various horses they were interested in, but they could not detach their thoughts from Ketley, and their eyes went back to the queer little sallow-faced man who sat on a high stool in the adjoining bar, paring his nails. They felt something was going to happen, and before they could say the word he had plunged the knife deep into his neck and had fallen heavily on the floor. William vaulted over the counter. As he did so he felt something break in his throat, and when Stack and Journeyman came to his assistance he was almost as white as the corpse at his feet. Blood flowed from his mouth and from Ketley's neck in a deep stream that swelled into a great pool and thickened on the sawdust. "I was jumping over that bar," William replied faintly. "I'll see to my husband," said Esther. A rush of blood cut short his words, and leaning on his wife he walked feebly round into the back parlour. Esther rang the bell violently. "Go round at once to Dr. Green," she said, "and if he isn't in, inquire which is the nearest. Don't come back without a doctor." William had broken a small blood vessel, and the doctor said he would have to be very careful for a long time. It was likely to prove a long case, but Ketley had severed the jugular at one swift keen stroke, and had died almost instantly. Of course there was an inquest, and the coroner asked many questions regarding the habits of the deceased. Mrs. Ketley was one of the witnesses called, and she deposed that he had lost a great deal of money lately in betting, and that he went to the King's Head for the purpose of betting. The police deposed that the landlord of the King's Head had been fined £100 for keeping a betting house, and the foreman of the jury remarked that betting houses were the ruin of the poor classes, and that they ought to be put a stop to. The coroner added that such places as the King's Head should not be licensed. That was the simplest and most effectual way of dealing with the nuisance. "There never was no luck about this house," said William. and what there was has left us. In 3 months' time we shall be turned out of it neck and crop. Another conviction would mean a fine of a couple of hundred, or most likely 3 months, and that would just about be the end of me." "They'll never license us again," said Esther. "And the boy at school, and doing so well." "I'm sorry, Esther, to have brought this trouble on you. We must do the best we can, get the best price we can for the house. I may be lucky enough to back a few winners, that's all there is to be said. The house was always an unlucky one. I hate the place, and should be glad to get out of it."
Esther sighed. She didn't like to hear the house spoken ill of, and after so many years it did seem a shame. End of chapter 41. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 42 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 42. Esther kept William within doors during the winter months. If his health did not improve, it got no worse, and she had begun to hope that the breakage of the blood vessel did not mean lung disease. But the harsh winds of spring did not suit him, and there was business with his lawyer to which he was obliged to attend. A determined set was going to be made against the renewal of his license, and he was determined to defeat his opponents. Counsel was instructed, and a great deal of money was spent on the case, but the license was nevertheless refused, and the north-east wind did not cease to rattle. It seemed resolved on William's death, and with the sick husband on her hands, and all the money they had invested in the house irreparably lost, Esther began to make preparations for moving. William had proved a kind husband, and in the 7 years she had spent in the King's Head there had been some enjoyment of life. She couldn't say that she had been unhappy. She had always disapproved of the betting. They had tried to do without it. There was a great deal in life which one couldn't approve of. But Ketley had never been very right in his head, and Sarah's misfortune had had very little to do with the King's Head. They had all tried to keep her from that man. It was her own fault. There were worse places than the King's Head. It wasn't for her to abuse it. She had lived there 7 years. She had seen her boy growing up. He was almost a young man now, and had had the best education. That much good the King's Head had done, but perhaps it was no longer suited to William's health. The betting, she was tired thinking about that, and that constant nipping, it was impossible for him to keep from it with every one asking him to drink with them. A look of fear and distress passed across her face, and she stopped for a moment. She was rolling up a pair of curtains. She did not know how they were to live. That was the worst of it. If they only had back the money they had sunk in the house, she would not so much mind. That was what was so hard to bear. All that money lost, just as if they had thrown it into the river. 7 years of hard work, for she had worked hard, and nothing to show for it. If she had been doing the grand lady all the time it would have been no worse. Horses had won and horses had lost. A great deal of trouble and fuss, and nothing to show for it. That was what stuck in her throat. Nothing to show for it. She looked round the dismantled walls, and descended the vacant staircase. She would never serve another pint of beer in that bar. What a strong big fellow he was when she first went to live with him. He was sadly changed. Would she ever see him strong and well again? She remembered he had told her that he was worth nearly £3,000. She hadn't brought him luck. He wasn't worth anything like that today. "How much have we in the bank, dear?"
A bit over £600. I was reckoning of it up yesterday. But what do you want to know for? To remind me that I've been losing? Well, I have been losing. I hope you're satisfied."
"I wasn't thinking of such a thing."
"Yes, you was. There's no use saying you wasn't. It ain't my fault if the 'orses don't win. I do the best I can."
She did not answer him. Then he said,
"It's my 'ealth that makes me irritable, dear. You aren't angry, are you?"
"No, dear, I know you don't mean it, and I don't pay no attention to it." She spoke so gently that he looked at her surprised, for he remembered her quick temper, and he said,
"You're the best wife a man ever had."
"No, I'm not, Bill, but I tries to do my best." The spring was the harshest ever known, and his cough grew worse, and the blood spitting returned. Esther grew seriously alarmed. Their doctor spoke of Brompton Hospital, and she insisted on his going there to be examined. William would not have her come with him, and she did not press the point, fearing to irritate him, but sat at home waiting anxiously for him to return, hoping against hope, for their doctor had told her that he feared very long trouble, and she could tell from his face and manner that he had bad news for her. All her strength left her, but she conquered her weakness and said, "Now tell me what they said. I've a right to know. I want to know."
"They said it was consumption."
"Oh, did they say that?"
"Yes, but they don't mean that I'm going to die. They said they hoped they could patch me up. People often live for years with only half a lung, and it is only the left one that's gone."
He coughed slightly and wiped the blood from his lips. Esther was quite overcome.
"Now, don't look like that," he said, "or I shall fancy I'm going to die tomorrow."
"They said they thought they could patch you up?"
"Yes, they said I might go on a long while yet, but that I would never be the man I was."
This was so obvious she could not check a look of pity.
"If you're going to look at me like that, I'd sooner go into the hospital at once. It ain't the cheerfulest of places, but it will be better than here."
"I'm sorry it was consumption, but if they said they could patch you up, it will be all right. It was a great deal for them to say." Her duty was to overcome her grief and speak as if the doctors had told him that there was nothing the matter that a little careful nursing would fail to put right. William had faith in the warm weather, and she resolved to put her trust in it. It was hard to see him wasting away before her eyes and keep cheerful looks in her face, and an accent of cheerfulness in her voice. The sunshine which had come at last seemed to suck up all the life that was in him. He grew paler and withered like a plant. Then ill luck seemed to have joined in the hunt. He could not touch a winner, and their fortune drained away with his life. Favourites and outsiders, it mattered not. Whatever he backed lost. And Esther dreaded the cry,
"Winner, all the winner."
He sat on the little balcony in the sunny evenings, looking down the back street for the boy to appear with the special. Then she had to go and fetch the paper. On the rare occasions when he won, the spectacle was even more painful. He brightened up. His thin arm and hand moved nervously, and he began to make projects and indulge in hopes which he knew were vain. She insisted, however, on his taking regularly the medicine they gave him at the hospital, and this was difficult to do, for his irritability increased in measure as he perceived the medicine was doing him no good. He found fault with the doctors, railed against them unjustly, and all the while the little cough continued, and the blood spitting returned at the end of cruel intervals, when he had begun to hope that at least that trouble was done with. One morning he told his wife that he was going to ask the doctors to examine him again. They had spoken of patching him up, but he wanted to know whether he was going to live or die. There was a certain relief in hearing him speak so plainly. She had had enough of the torture of hope, and would like to know the worst. He liked better to go to the hospital alone, but she felt that she could not sit at home counting the minutes for him to return, and begged to be allowed to go with him. To her surprise he offered no opposition. She had expected that her request would bring about quite a little scene, but he had taken it so much as a matter of course that she should accompany him that she was doubly glad that she had proposed to go with him. If she hadn't, he might have accused her of neglecting him. She put on her hat. The day was too hot for a jacket. It was the beginning of August. The town was deserted, and the streets looked as if they were about to evaporate or lie down exhausted, and the poor, dry, dusty air that remained after the season was too poor even for Esther's healthy lungs. It made William cough, and she hoped the doctors would order him to the seaside. From the top of their omnibus they could see right across the plateau of the Green Park, dry and colourless like a desert. As they descended the hill they noticed that autumn was already busying in the foliage. Lower down the dells were full of fallen leaves. At Hyde Park Corner the blown dust whirled about the hilltop. All along St. George's Place glimpses of the empty park appeared through the railings. The wide pavements, the Brompton Road, and a semi-detached public house at the crossroads announced suburban London to the Londoner. "You see," said William, "where them trees are, where the road turns off to the left, that house is the Bell and Horns. That's the sort of house I should like to see you in." "It's a pity we didn't buy it when we had the money."
"Buy it? That house is worth £10,000 if it is worth a penny."
"I was once in a situation not far from here. I like the Fulham Road. It's like a long village street, ain't it?" Her first service was with Mrs. Dunbar in Sydney Street, and she remembered the square church tower at the Chelsea end. A little further on there was the Vestry Hall in the King's Road, and then Oakley Street on the left, leading down to Battersea. Mrs. Dunbar used to go to some gardens at the end of the King's Road. Cremorne Gardens, that was the name. There used to be fireworks there, and she often spent the evening at the back window watching the rockets go up. That was just before Lady Elwyn had got her the situation as kitchen maid at Woodview. She remembered the very shops. There was Palmer's, the butterman, and there was Hyde's, the grocer's. Everything was just as she had left it. How many years ago? 15 or 16? So enwrapped was she in memories that William had to touch her.
"Here we are," he said. "Don't you remember the place?"
She remembered very well that great red brick building, a centrepiece with two wings surrounded by high iron railings lined with gloomy shrubs. The long straight walks, the dismal trees arow, where pale-faced men walked or rested feebly, had impressed themselves on her young mind, thin, patient men, pacing their sepulchre. She had wondered who they were, if they would get well, and then, quick with sensation of lingering death, she had hurried away on her errands. The low, wooden, yellow painted gates were unchanged. She had never before seen them open, and it was new to her to see the gardens filled with bright sunshine and numerous visitors. There were flowers in the beds, and the trees were beautiful in their leafage. A little yellow was creeping through, and from time to time a leaf fell exhausted from the branches. William, who was already familiar with the custom of the place, nodded to the porter and was let pass without question. He did not turn to the principal entrance in the middle of the building, but went towards a side entrance. The house physician was standing near it talking with a young man whom Esther recognized as Mr. Alden. The thought that he too might be dying of consumption crossed her mind, but his appearance and his healthy, hearty laugh reassured her. A stout common girl, healthy too, came out of the building with a child, a little thing of 12 or 13, with death in her face. Mr. Alden stopped her, and in his cheerful, kind manner hoped the little one was better. She answered that she was. The doctor bade him good bye and beckoned William and Esther to follow him. Esther would have liked to have spoken to Mr. Alden, but he did not see her, and she followed her husband, who was talking with the doctor, through the doorway into a long passage. At the end of the passage there were a number of girls in print dresses. The gaiety of the dresses led Esther to think that they must be visitors, but the little calf warned her that death was amongst them. As she went past she caught sight of a wasted form in a bath chair. The thin hands were laid on the knees on a little handkerchief, and there were spots on the whiteness deeper than the colour of the dress. They passed down another passage, meeting a sister on their way. Pretty and discreet she was in her black dress and veil, and she raised her eyes, glancing affectionately at the young doctor. No doubt they loved each other. The eternal love story among so much death. Esther wished to be present at the examination, but a sudden whim made William say that he would prefer to be alone with the doctor, and she returned to the garden. Mr. Alden had not yet gone. He stood with his back turned to her. The little girl she had seen him speaking to was sitting on a bench under the trees. She held in her hands a skein of yellow worsted, which her companion was winding into a ball. Two other young women were with them, and all four were smiling and whispering and looking towards Mr. Alden. They evidently sought to attract his attention, and wished him to come and speak to them. Just the natural desire of women to please, and moved by the pathos of this poor coquetting, he went to them, and Esther could see that they all wanted to talk to him. She would have liked to have spoken to him. He was an old friend, and she walked up the grounds, intending to pass by him as she walked back. His back was still turned to her, and they were all so interested that they gave no heed to anything else. One of the young women had an exceedingly pretty face, a small oval, perfectly snow white, and large blue eyes, shaded with long dark lashes, a little aquiline nose, and Esther heard her say, "I should be well enough if it wasn't for the calf. It isn't no better since—" The calf interrupted the end of the sentence, and, affecting to misunderstand her, Mr. Alden said, "No better than it was a week ago?" "A week ago?" said the poor girl. "It's no better since Christmas." There was surprise in her voice, and the pity of it took Mr. Alden in the throat, and it was with difficulty that he answered that he hoped that the present fine weather would enable her to get well. "Such weather as this," he said, "is as good as going abroad." This assertion was disputed. One of the women had been to Australia for her health, and the story of travel was interspersed with the little calves, terrible in their apparent insignificance. But it was Mr. Alden that the others wished to hear speak. They knew all about their companion's trip to Australia, and in their impatience their eyes went towards Esther. So Mr. Alden became aware of a new presence, and he turned. "What, is it you, Esther?" "Yes, sir." "But there doesn't seem much the matter with you. You're all right?" "Yes, I'm all right, sir. It's my husband." They walked a few yards up the path. "Your husband? I'm very sorry." "He's been an outdoor patient for some time. He's being examined by the doctors now." "Whom did you marry, Esther?" "William Latch, a betting man, sir." "You married a betting man, Esther? How curiously things do work out. I remember you were engaged to a pious young man, the stationer's foreman. That was when you were with Miss Rice. You know, I suppose, that she's dead." "No, sir, I didn't know it. I've had so much trouble lately that I've not been to see her for nearly 2 years. When did she die, sir?" "About 2 months ago." "So you married a betting man. Miss Rice did say something about it, but I don't think I understood that he was a betting man. I thought he was a publican." "So he was, sir. We lost our licence through the betting." "You say he's being examined by the doctor. Is it a bad case?" "I'm afraid it is, sir." They walked on in silence until they reached the gate. "To me this place is infinitely pathetic. That little calf never silent for long. Did you hear that poor girl say with surprise that her calf is no better than it was last Christmas?" "Yes, sir, poor girl. I don't think she's long for this world." "But tell me about your husband, Esther," he said, and his face filled with an expression of true sympathy. "I'm a subscriber, and if your husband would like to become an indoor patient, I hope you'll let me know." "Thank you, sir. You was always the kindest. But there's no reason why I should trouble you. Some friends of ours have already recommended him, and it only rests with himself to remain out or go in." He pulled out his watch and said, "I'm sorry to have met you in such sad circumstances, but I'm glad to have seen you. It must be 7 years or more since you left Miss Rice. You haven't changed much. You keep your good looks." "Oh, sir!" He laughed at her embarrassment and walked across the road hailing a hansom, just as he used to in old times when he came to see Miss Rice. The memory of those days came back upon her. It was strange to meet him again after so many years. She felt she had seen him now for the last time. But it was foolish and wicked too, to think of such things, her husband dying. But she couldn't help it. He reminded her so much of what was past and gone. A moment after she dashed these personal tears aside and walked open-hearted to meet William. What had the doctor said? She must know the truth. If she was to lose him she would lose everything. No, not everything. Her boy would still remain to her. And she felt that, after all, her boy was what was most real to her in life. These thoughts had passed through her mind before William had had time to answer her question. "He said the left lung was gone, that I'd never be able to stand another winter in England. He said I must go to Egypt." "Egypt," she repeated. "Is that very far from here?" "What matter how far it is? If I can't live in England I must go where I can live." "Don't be cross, dear. I know it's your health that makes you that irritable, but it is hard to bear at times."
You won't care to go to Egypt with me."
"How can you think that, Bill? Have I ever refused you anything?"
"Quite right, old girl. I'm sorry. I know you'd do anything for me. I've always said so, haven't I? It is this calf that makes me sharp-tempered and fretful. I shall be different when I get to Egypt."
"When do we start?"
"If we get away by the end of October, it will be all right. It will cost a lot of money, the journey is expensive, and we shall have to stop there 6 months. I couldn't think of coming home before the end of April."
Esther did not answer. They walked some yards in silence. Then he said,
"I've been very unlucky lately. There isn't much over £100 in the bank."
"How much shall we want?"
£300 or £400 at least. We won't take the boy with us. We couldn't afford that, but I should like to pay a couple of quarters in advance."
"That won't be much."
"Not if I have any luck. The luck must turn, and I have some splendid information about the Great Ebor and the Yorkshire Stakes. Stack knows of a horse or two that's being kept for Sandown. Unfortunately there is not much doing in August. I must try to make up the money. It's a matter of life and death."
It was for his very life that her husband was now gambling on the race course, and a sensation of very great wickedness came up in her mind, but she stifled it instantly. William had noticed the look of fear that appeared in her eyes, and he said,
"It's my last chance. I can't get the money any other way, and I don't want to die yet awhile. I haven't been as good to you as I'd like, and I want to do something for the boy, you know."
He had been told not to remain out after sundown, but he was resolved to leave no stone unturned in his search for information, and often he returned home as late as 9 and 10 o'clock at night, coughing. Esther could hear him all up the street. He came in ready to drop with fatigue, his pockets filled with sporting papers, and these he studied, spreading them on the table under the lamp, while Esther sat striving to do some needlework. It often dropped out of her hands, and her eyes filled with tears, but she took care that he should not see these tears. She did not wish to distress him unnecessarily. Poor chap, he had had enough to put up with as it was. Sometimes he read out the horses' names, and asked her which she thought would win, which seemed to her a likely name, but she begged of him not to ask her. They had had many quarrels on this subject, but in the end he understood that it was not fair to ask her. Sometimes Stack and Journeyman came in, and they argued about weights and distances until midnight. Old John came to see them, and every day he had heard some new tip. It often rose to Esther's lips to tell William to back his fancy and have done with it. She could see that these discussions only fatigued him, that he was no nearer to the truth now than he was a fortnight ago. Meanwhile the horse he had thought of backing had gone up in the betting, but he said that he must be very careful. They had only £100 left. He must be careful not to risk this money foolishly. It was his very life blood. If he were to lose all his money, he wouldn't only sign his own death warrant, but also hers. He might linger on a long while, there was no knowing, but he would never be able to do any work, that was certain, unless he went out to Egypt. The doctor had said so, and then it would be she who would have to support him. And if God were merciful enough to take him off at once, he would leave her in a worse plight than he had found her in. And the boy growing up. Oh, it was terrible. He buried his face in his hands and seemed quite overcome. Then the calf would take him, and for a few minutes he could only think of himself. Esther gave him a little milk to drink, and he said,
"There's £100 left, Esther. It isn't much, but it's something. I don't believe that there's much use in my going to Egypt. I shall never get well. It is better that I should pitch myself into the river. That would be the least selfish way out of it."
"William, I will not have you talk in that way," Esther said, laying down her work and going over to him. "If you was to do such a thing I should never forgive you. I could never think the same of you."
"All right, old girl, don't be frightened. I've been thinking too much about them 'orses, and I'm a bit depressed. I dare say it will come out all right. I think that Mahomet is sure to win the Great Ebor, don't you?"
"I don't think there's no better judge than yourself. They all say if he don't fall lame that he is bound to win."
"Then Mahomet shall carry my money. I'll back him tomorrow."
Now that he had made up his mind what horse to back, his spirits revived. He was able to dismiss the subject from his mind, and they talked of other things, of their son, and they laid projects for his welfare. But on the day of the race, from early morning, William could barely contain himself. Usually he took his winnings and losings very quietly. When he had been especially unlucky he swore a bit, but Esther had never seen any great excitement before a race was run. The issue of this race were extraordinary, and it was heartbreaking to see him suffer. He could not remain still a moment. A prey to all the terrors of hope, exhausted with anticipation, he rested himself against the sideboard and wiped drops of sweat from his forehead. A broiling sunlight infested their window panes, the room grew oven-like, and he was obliged at last to go into the back parlour and lie down. He lay there in his shirt sleeves, quite exhausted, hardly able to breathe. The arm, once so strong and healthy, was shrunken to a little nothing. He seemed quite bloodless, and looking at him Esther could hardly hope that any climate would restore him to health. He just asked her what the time was, and said,
"The race is being run now."
a few minutes after he said,
"I think Mahomet has won. I fancied I saw him get first past the post."
He spoke as if he were sure, and said nothing about the evening paper. If he were disappointed, Esther felt that it would kill him, and she knelt down by the bedside and prayed that God would allow the horse to win. It meant her husband's life, that was all she knew. Oh, that the horse might win! Presently he said,
"There is no use praying. I feel sure it is all right. Go into the next room. Stand on the balcony so that you may see the boy coming along."
A pale yellow sky rose behind the brick neighbourhood, and with agonized soul the woman viewed its plausive serenity. There seemed to be hope in its quietness. At that moment the cry came up,
"Winner! Winner!"
It came from the north, from the east, and now from the west. Three boys were shouting forth the news simultaneously. Ah, if it should prove bad news! But somehow she too felt that the news was good. She ran to meet the boy. She had a halfpenny ready in her hand. He fumbled, striving to detach a single paper from the quire under his arm. Seeing her impatient, he said,
"Mahomet's won."
Then the pavement seemed to slide beneath her feet, and the setting sun she could hardly see. So full was her heart, so burdened with the happiness that she was bringing to the poor sick fellow who lay in his shirt sleeves on the bed in the back room. "It is all right," she said. "I thought so too. It seemed like it." His face flushed. Life seemed to come back. He sat up and took the paper from her. "There," he said, "I've got my place money too. I hope Stack and Journeyman come in tonight. I'd like to have a chat about this. Come, give me a kiss, dear. I'm not going to die after all. It isn't a pleasant thing to think that you must die, that there's no hope for you, that you must go underground." The next thing to do was to pick the winner of the Yorkshire Handicap. In this he was not successful, but he backed several winners at Sandown Park, and at the close of the week had made nearly enough to take him to Egypt. The Doncaster week, however, proved disastrous. He lost most of his winnings and had to look forward to retrieving his fortunes at Newmarket.
"The worst of it is, if I don't make up the money by October, it will be no use. They say the November fogs will polish me off."
Between Doncaster and Newmarket he lost a bet, and this bet carried him back into despondency. He felt it was no use struggling against fate. Better remain in London and be taken away at the end of November or December. He couldn't last much longer than that. This would allow him to leave Esther at least £50 to go on with. The boy would soon be able to earn money. It would be better so. No use wasting all this money for the sake of his health, which wasn't worth twopence 3 farthings. It was like throwing sovereigns after farthings. He didn't want to do any betting. He was as hollow as a shell inside. He could feel it. Egypt could do nothing for him. And as he had to go, better sooner than later. Esther argued with him. What should she have to live for if he was taken from her? The doctors had said that Egypt might set him right. She didn't know much about such things, but she had always heard that it was extraordinary how people got cured out there.
"That's true," he said. "I've heard that people who couldn't live a week in England, or haven't the length of your finger of lung left, can go on all right out there. I might get something to do out there, and the boy might come out after us."
"That's the way I like to hear you talk. Who knows, at Newmarket we might have luck. Just one big bet, a winner at 50 to 1, that's all we want."
"That's just what has been passing in me mind. I've got particular information about the XXXIX and Cambridgeshire. I could get the price you speak of, 50 to 1 against the two, Matchbox and Chasuble, the double event. You know, I'm inclined to go it. It's my last chance."
End of chapter 42. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 43 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 43. When Matchbox galloped home the winner of the XXXIX by 5 lengths, William was lying in his bed, seemingly at death's door. He had remained out late one evening, had caught cold, and his mouth was constantly filled with blood. He was much worse, and could hardly take notice of the good news. When he revived a little, he said,
"It has come too late."
But when Chasuble was backed to win thousands at 10 to 1, and Journeyman and Stack assured him that the stable was quite confident of being able to pull it off, his spirits revived. He spoke of hedging.
If,
he said to Esther,
I was to get out at 8 or 9 to 1, I should be able to leave you something, you know, in case of accidents.
but he would not entrust laying off his bet to either Stack or Journeyman. He spoke of a cab and seeing to it himself. If he did this, the doctor assured him that it would not much matter whether Chasuble won or lost. The best thing he could do, the doctor said, would be to become an indoor patient at once. In the hospital he would be an equable temperature, and he would receive an attention which he could not get at home. William did not like going into the hospital. It would be a bad omen. If he did, he felt sure that Chasuble would not win. "What has going or not going to the hospital to do with Chasuble's chance of winning the Cambridgeshire?" said the doctor. "This window is loose in its sash, a draught comes under the door, and if you close out the draught the atmosphere of the room becomes stuffy. You're thinking of going abroad. A fortnight's nice rest is just what you want to set you up for your journey." So he allowed himself to be persuaded. He was taken to the hospital, and Esther remained at home waiting for the fateful afternoon. Now that the dying man was taken from her, she had no work to distract her thoughts. The unanswerable question, would Chasuble win, was always before her. She saw the slender greyhound creatures as she had seen them at Epsom, through a sea of heads and hats, and she asked herself if Chasuble was the brown horse that had galloped in first, or the chestnut that had trotted in last. She often thought she was going mad. Her head seemed like it, a sensation of splitting like a piece of calico. She went to see her boy. Jack was a great tall fellow of 15, and had happily lost none of his affection for his mother, and great sweetness rose up within her. She looked at his long, straight, yellow-stockinged legs. She settled the collar of his cloak, and slipped her fingers into his leathern belt as they walked side by side. He was bareheaded according to the fashion of his school, and she kissed the wild dark curls with which his head was run over. They were much brighter in colour when he was a little boy, those days when she slaved 17 hours a day for his dear life, but he paid her back tenfold for the hardship she had undergone. She listened to the excellent report his masters gave of his progress, and walked through the quadrangles and the corridors with him, thinking of the sound of his voice as he told her the story of his classes and his studies. She must live for him, though for herself she had had enough of life. But, thank God, she had her darling boy, and whatever unhappiness there might be in store for her, she would bear it for his sake. He knew that his father was ill, but she refrained and told him no word of the tragedy that was hanging over them. The noble instincts which were so intrinsically Esther Waters' told her that it were a pity to soil at the outset a young life with a sordid story. And though it would have been an inexpressible relief to her to have shared her trouble with her boy, she forced back her tears, and courageously bore her cross alone, without once allowing its edge to touch him. And every day that visitors were allowed she went to the hospital with a newspaper containing the last betting. "Chasuble 10 to 1 taken," William read out. The mare had advanced 3 points, and William looked at Esther inquiringly and with hope in his eyes. "I think she'll win," he said, raising himself in his cane chair. "I hope so, dear," she murmured, and she settled his cushions. 2 days after the mare was back again at 13 to 1 taken and offered. She went back even as far as 18 to 1, and then returned for a while to 12 to 1. This fluctuation meant that something was wrong, and William began to lose hope. But on the following day the mare was back to win a good deal of money at Tattersall's, and once more she stood at 10 to 1. Seeing her back at the old price made William look so hopeful that a patient stopped as he passed down the corridor, and catching the sight of the sportsman on William's lap, he asked him if he was interested in racing. William told him that he was, and that if Chasuble won he would be able to go to Egypt.
Them that has money can buy health as well as everything else. We'd all get well if we could get out there.
Then William told him how much he stood to win.
That'll keep you going long enough to set you straight. You say the mare's backed at 10 to 1, 200 to 20. I wonder if I could get the money. I might sell up the house.
But before he had time to realize the necessary money, the mare was driven back to 18 to 1, and he said,
"She won't win. I might as well leave the wife in the house. There's no luck for them that comes here."
On the day of the race Esther walked through the streets like one daft, stupidly interested in the passers-by and the disputes that arose between the drivers of cabs and omnibuses. Now and then her thoughts collected, and it seemed to her impossible that the mare should win. If she did, they would have £2,500 and would go to Egypt. But she could not imagine such a thing. It seemed so much more natural that the horse should lose, and that her husband should die, and that she should have to face the world once more. She offered up prayers that Chasuble might win, although it did not seem right to address God on the subject, but her heart often felt like breaking, and she had to do something. And she had no doubt that God would forgive her. But now that the day had come, she did not feel as if he had granted her request. At the same time it did not seem possible that her husband was going to die. It was all so hard to understand. She stopped at the Bell and Horns to see what the time was, and was surprised to find it was half an hour later than she had expected. The race was being run. Chasuble's hoofs were deciding whether her husband was to live or die. It was on the wire by this time. The wires were distinct upon a blue and dove-coloured sky. Did that one go to Newmarket, or the other? Which? The red buildings came in sight, and a patient walked slowly up the walk. His back turned to her. Another had sat down to rest. 16 years ago patients were walking there then, and the leaves were scattering then just as now. Without transition of thoughts she wondered when the first boy would appear with the news. Williams was not in the grounds. He was upstairs behind those windows. Poor fellow! She could fancy him sitting there. Perhaps he was watching for her out of one of those windows. But there was no use her going up until she had the news. She must wait for the paper. She walked up and down listening for the cry. Every now and then expectation led her to mistake some ordinary cry for the terrible "Winner, all the winner," with which the whole town would echo in a few minutes. She hastened forward. No, it was not it. At last she heard the word shrieked behind her. She hastened after the boy, but failed to overtake him. Returning, she met another, gave him a halfpenny and took a paper. Then she remembered she must ask the boy to tell her who won. But heedless of her question, he had run across the road to sell papers to some men who had come out of a public house. She must not give William the paper and wait for him to read the news to her. If the news were bad, the shock might kill him. She must learn first what the news was, so that her face and manner might prepare him for the worst if need be. So she offered the paper to the porter and asked him to tell her. "Bramble, King of Trumps, young hopeful," he read out. "Are you sure that Chasuble hasn't won?" "Of course I'm sure. There it is." "I can't read," she said, as she turned away. The news had stunned her. The world seemed to lose reality. She was uncertain what to do, and several times repeated to herself, "There's nothing for it but to go up and tell him. I don't see what else I can do." The staircase was very steep. She climbed it slowly, and stopped at the first landing and looked out of the window. A poor hollow-chested creature, the wreck of a human being, struggled up behind her. He had to rest several times, and in the hollow buildings his cough sounded loud and hollow. "It isn't generally so loud as that," she thought, and wondered how she could tell William the news. "He wanted to see Jack grow up to be a man. He thought that we might all go to Egypt, and that he'd get quite well there, for there's plenty of sunshine there. But now he'll have to make up his mind to die in the November fogs." Her thoughts came strangely clear, and she was astonished at her indifference, until a sudden revulsion of feeling took her as she was going up the last flight. She couldn't tell him the news. It was too cruel. She let the patient pass her, and when alone on the landing she looked down into the depths. She thought she'd like to fall over, anything rather than to do what she knew she must do. But her cowardice only endured for a moment, and with a firm step she walked into the corridor. It seemed to cross the entire building, and was floored and wainscoted with the same brown varnished wood as the staircase. There were benches along the walls, and emaciated and worn out men lay on the long cane chairs in the windowed recesses by which the passage was lighted. The wards, containing sometimes 3, sometimes 6 or 7 beds, opened on to this passage. The doors of the wards were all open, and as she passed along she started at the sight of a boy sitting up in a bed. His head had been shaved, and only a slight bristle covered the crown. The head and face were a large white mass with 2 eyes. At the end of the passage there was a window, and William sat there reading a book. He saw her before she saw him, and when she caught sight of him she stopped, holding the paper loose before her between finger and thumb, and as she approached she saw that her manner had already broken the news to him.
"I see she didn't win," he said.
"No, dear, she didn't win. We wasn't lucky this time. Next time."
"There is no next time, at least for me. I shall be far away from here when flat racing begins again. The November fogs will do for me. I feel that they will. I hope there'll be no lingering, that's all. Better to know the worst and make up your mind. So I have to go, have I? So there's no hope, and I shall be underground before the next meeting. I shall never lay or take the odds again. It do seem strange. If only that mare had won. I knew damned well she wouldn't if I came here."
Then, catching sight of the pained look on his wife's face, he said,
"I don't suppose it made no difference. It was to be, and what has to be has to be. I've got to go underground. I felt it was to be all along. Egypt would have done me no good. I never believed in it, only a lot of false hope. You don't think what I say is true? Look here, do you know what book this is? This is the Bible.
That'll prove to you that I knew the game was up. I knew, I can't tell you how, but I knew the mare wouldn't win. One always seems to know. Even when I backed her, I didn't feel about her like I did about the other one. And ever since I've been feeling more and more sure that it wasn't to be. Somehow it didn't seem likely, and today something told me that the game was up. So I asked for this book. There's wonderful, beautiful things in it.
There is indeed, Bill, and I hope you won't get tired of it, but will go on reading it.
It's extraordinary how consoling it is. Listen to this. Isn't it beautiful? Ain't them words heavenly?
They is indeed. I knew you'd come to God at last.
I'm afraid I've not led a good life. I wouldn't listen to you when you used to tell me of the lot of harm the betting used to bring on the poor people what used to come to our place. There's Sarah. I suppose she's out of prison by this. You've seen nothing of her, I suppose?
No, nothing.
There was Ketley.
No, Bill, don't let's think about it. If you're truly sorry, God will forgive.
Do you think he will? And the others that we know nothing about? I wouldn't listen to you. I was headstrong, but I understand it all now. My eyes have been opened. Them pious folk that got up the prosecution knew what they was about. I forgive them one and all."
William coughed a little. The conversation paused, and the cough was repeated down the corridor. Now it came from the men lying on the long cane chairs, now from the poor emaciated creature, hollow cheeks, brown eyes, and beard, who had just come out of his ward and had sat down on a bench by the wall. Now it came from an old man 6 feet high, with snow white hair. He sat near them and worked assiduously at a piece of tapestry. "It'll be better when it's cut," he said to one of the nurses, who had stopped to compliment him of his work. "It'll be better when it's cut." Then the cough came from one of the wards, and Esther thought of the fearsome boy sitting bolt up, his huge tallow-like face staring through the silence of the room. A moment after the cough came from her husband's lips, and they looked at each other. Both wanted to speak, and neither knew what to say. At last William spoke.
"I was saying that I never had that feeling about Chasuble as one has about a winner. Did she run second? Just like my luck if she did. Let me see the paper."
Esther handed it to him.
"Bramble, a 50-to-1 chance. Not a man in 100 backed her. King of trumps. There was some place money lost on him. Young hopeful, a rank outsider. What a day for the bookies."
"You mustn't think of them things no more," said Esther. "You've got the book. It'll do you more good."
"If I'd only have thought of Bramble. I could have had 100-to-1 against matchbooks and Bramble coupled."
"What's the use of thinking of things that's over? We should think of the future."
"If I'd only been able to hedge that bet, I should have been able to leave you something to go on with. But now, when everything is paid for, you'll have hardly a £5 note. You've been a good wife to me, and I've been a bad husband to you."
"Bill, you mustn't speak like that. You must try to make your peace with God. Think of Him. He'll think of us that you leave behind. I've always had faith in Him. He'll not desert me." Her eyes were quite dry. The instinct of life seemed to have left her. They spoke some little while longer, until it was time for visitors to leave the hospital. It was not until she got into the Fulham Road that tears began to run down her cheeks. They poured faster and faster, like rain after a long dry weather. The whole world disappeared in a mist of tears, and so overcome was she by her grief that she had to lean against the railings, and then the passers-by turned and looked at her curiously. End of chapter 43. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 44 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 44. With fair weather he might hold on till Christmas, but if much fog was about he would go off with the last leaves. One day Esther received a letter asking her to defer her visit from Friday to Sunday. He hoped to be better on Sunday, and then they would arrange when she should come to take him away. He begged of her to have Jack home to meet him. He wanted to see his boy before he died. Mrs. Collins, a woman who lived in the next room, read the letter to Esther.
If you can, do as he wishes. Once they get them fancies into their heads, there's no getting them out.
If he leaves the hospital on a day like this, it'll be the death of him. Both women went to the window. The fog was so thick that only an outline here and there was visible of the house opposite. The lamps burnt low, mournful, as in a city of the dead, and the sounds that rose out of the street added to the terror of the strange darkness. What do we say about Jack? That I'm to send for him? It's natural he should like to see the boy before he goes, but it would be cheerfuller to take him to the hospital.
You see, he wants to die at home. He wants you to be with him at the last.
Yes, I want to see the last of him. But the boy, where is he to sleep?
We can lay a mattress down in my room. An old woman like me, it don't matter.
Sunday morning was harsh and cold, and when she came out of South Kensington Station a fog was rising in the squares, and a great whiff of yellow cloud drifted down upon the housetops. In the Fulham Road the tops of the houses disappeared, and the light of the third gas lamp was not visible. This is the sort of weather that takes them off. I can hardly breathe it myself. Everything was shadow-like. Those walking in front of her passed out of sight like shades, and once she thought she must have missed her way, though that was impossible, for her way was quite straight. Suddenly the silhouette of the winged building rose up enormous on the sulphur sky. The low-lying gardens were full of poisonous vapour, and the thin trees seemed like the ghosts of consumptive men. The porter coughed like a dead man as she passed, and he said, "Bad weather for the poor sick ones upstairs." She was prepared for a change for the worse, but she did not expect to see a living man looking so like a dead one. He could no longer lie back in bed and breathe, so he was propped up with pillows, and he looked even as shadow-like as those she had half seen in the fog cloud. There was fog even in the ward, and the lights burned red in the silence. There were 5 beds, low iron bedsteads, and each was covered with a dark red rug. In the furthest corner lay the wreck of a great working man. He wore his hobnails and his corduroys, and his once brawny arm lay along his thigh, shrivelled and powerless as a child's. In the middle of the room a little clerk, wasted and weary, without any strength at all, lay striving for breath. The navvy was alone. The little clerk had his family round him, his wife and his 2 children, a baby in arms and a little boy 3 years old. The doctor had just come in, and the woman was prattling gaily about her confinement. She said, "I was up the following week. Wonderful what the wee women can go through. No one would think it. Brought the childer to see their father. They is a little idol to him, poor fellow." "How are you to day, dearie?" Esther said as she took a seat by her husband's bed.
Better than I was on Friday, but this weather'll do for me if it continues much longer. You see them 2 beds? They died yesterday, and I've heard that 3 or 4 that left the hospital are gone too."
The doctor came to William's bed.
Well, are you still determined to go home? He said.
"Yes, I'd like to die at home. You can't do nothing for me. I'd like to die at home. I want to see my boy."
"You can see Jack here," said Esther.
"I'd sooner see him at home. I suppose you don't want the trouble of a death in the house."
"Oh, William, how can you speak so?" The patient coughed painfully and leaned against the pillows, unable to speak. Esther remained with William till the time permitted to visitors had expired. He could not speak to her, but she knew he liked her to be with him. When she came on Thursday to take him away, he was a little better. The clerk's wife was chattering, the great navvy lay in the corner still as a block of stone. Esther often looked at him and wondered if he had no friend who could spare an hour to come and see him.
"I was beginning to think that you wasn't coming,"
said William.
"He's that restless," said the clerk's wife, "asking the time every 3 or 4 minutes."
"How could you think that?" said Esther.
"I dunno. You're a bit late, aren't you?"
"It often do make them that restless," said the clerk's wife.
"But me poor old man is quiet enough, aren't you, dear?"
The dying clerk could not answer, and the woman turned again to Esther.
"And how do you find him to day?"
"Much the same. I think he's a bit better, stronger, don't yer know? But this weather is that trying. I don't know how it was up your way, but down my way I never seen such a fog. I thought I'd have to turn back." At that moment the baby began to cry, and the woman walked up and down the ward, rocking it violently, talking loud and making a great deal of noise, but she could not quiet him.
"Hungry again," she said. "I never seen such a child for the breast."
And she sat down and unbuttoned her dress. When the young doctor entered she hurriedly covered herself. He begged her to continue, and spoke about her little boy. She showed him a scar on his throat. He had been suffering, but it was all right now. The doctor glanced at the breathless father.
"A little better to day, thank you, doctor."
"That's all right," and the doctor went over to William. "Are you still determined to leave the hospital?" he said.
"Yes, I want to go home. I want to."
"You'll find this weather very trying. You'd better—"
"No, thank you, sir. I should like to go home. You've been very kind. You've done everything that could be done for me. But it's God's will. My wife is very grateful to you too."
"Yes, indeed I am, sir. However am I to thank you for your kindness to my husband?" "I'm sorry I couldn't do more. But you'll want the sister to help you to dress him. I'll send her to you." When they got him out of bed, Esther was shocked at the spectacle of his poor body. There was nothing left of him. His poor chest, his wasted ribs, his legs gone to nothing, and the strange weakness, worst of all, which made it so hard for them to dress him. At last it was nearly done. Esther laced one boot, the nurse the other.
and leaning on Esther's arm he looked round the room for the last time. The navvy turned round on his bed and said, "Goodbye, mate."
Goodbye. Goodbye, all.
The clerk's little son clung to his mother's skirt, frightened at the weakness of so big a man.
"Go and say good-bye to the gentleman."
The little boy came forward timidly, offering his hand. William looked at the poor little white face. He nodded to the father and went out. As he went downstairs he said he would like to go home in a hansom. The doctor and nurse expostulated, but he persisted until Esther begged of him to forego the wish for her sake. "They do rattle so, these four-wheelers, especially when the windows are up. One can't speak." The cab jogged up Piccadilly, and as it climbed out of the hollow, the dying man's eyes were fixed on the circle of lights that shone across the Green Park. They looked like a distant village, and Esther wondered if William was thinking of Shoreham. She had seen Shoreham look like that sometimes. Or if he was thinking that he was looking on London for the last time. Was he saying to himself, "I shall never see Piccadilly again"? They passed St. James's Street. The Circus, with its mob of prostitutes, came into view. The Criterion Bar, with its loafers standing outside. William leaned a little forward, and Esther was sure he was thinking that he would never go into that bar again. The cab turned to the left, and Esther said that it would cross Soho, perhaps pass down Old Compton Street, opposite their old house. It happened that it did, and Esther and William wondered who were the new people who were selling beer and whisky in the bar. All the while boys were crying,
"Winner, all the winner." They was run today. Flat racing all over for this year.
Esther did not answer. The cab passed over a piece of asphalt, and he said,
"Is Jack waiting for us?"
"Yes, he came home yesterday."
The fog was thick in Bloomsbury, and when he got out of the cab he was taken with a fit of coughing, and had to cling to the railings. She had to pay the cab, and it took some time to find the money. Would no one open the door? She was surprised to see him make his way up the steps to the bell, and having got her change, she followed him into the house.
"I can manage. Go on first, I'll follow."
And stopping every 3 or 4 steps for rest, he slowly dragged himself up to the first landing. A door opened, and Jack stood on the threshold of the lighted room.
"Is that you, mother?" "Yes, dear. Your father is coming up."
The boy came forward to help, but his mother whispered,
"He'd rather come up by himself."
William had just strength to walk into the room. They gave him a chair, and he fell back exhausted. He looked around and seemed pleased to see his home again. Esther gave him some milk, into which she had put a little brandy, and he gradually revived.
"Come this way, Jack. I want to look at you. Come into the light where I can see you."
"Yes, father."
"I haven't long to see you, Jack. I wanted to be with you and your mother in our own home. I can talk a little now. I may not be able to tomorrow."
"Yes, father."
"I want you to promise me, Jack, that you'll never have nothing to do with racing and betting. It hasn't brought me or your mother any luck."
"Very well, father."
"You promise me, Jack. Give me your hand. You promise me that, Jack."
"Yes, father, I promise."
"I see it all clearly enough now. Your mother, Jack, is the best woman in the world. She loved you better than I did. She worked for you. That is a sad story. I hope you'll never hear it."
Husband and wife looked at each other, and in that look the wife promised the husband that the son should never know the story of her desertion.
She was always against the betting, Jack. She always knew it would bring us ill luck. I was once well off, but I lost everything. No good comes of money that one doesn't work for."
"I'm sure you worked enough for what you won," said Esther, "travelling day and night from race course to race course, standing on them race courses in all weathers. It was the colds you caught standing on them race courses that began the mischief."
"I worked hard enough, that's true, but it was not the right kind of work. I can't argue, Esther, but I know the truth now. What you always said was the truth. No good comes of money that hasn't been properly earned."
He sipped the brandy and milk and looked at Jack, who was crying bitterly.
"You mustn't cry like that, Jack. I want you to listen to me. I've still something on me mind. Your mother, Jack, is the best woman that ever lived. You're too young to understand how good. I didn't know how good for a long time, but I found it all out in time, as you will later, Jack, when you are a man. I'd hoped to see you grow up to be a man, Jack, and your mother and I thought that you'd have a nice bit of money, but the money I hoped to leave you is all gone. What I feel most is that I'm leaving you and your mother as badly off as she was when I married her."
He heaved a deep sigh, and Esther said,
"What is the good of talking of these things, weakening yourself for nothing?"
"I must speak, Esther. I should die happy if I knew how you and the boy was going to live. You'll have to go out and work for him as you did before. It will be like beginning it all again."
The tears rolled down his cheeks. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed, until the sobbing brought on a fit of coughing. Suddenly his mouth filled with blood. Jack went for the doctor, and all remedies were tried without avail. "There is one more remedy," the doctor said, "and if that fails you must prepare for the worst." But this last remedy proved successful, and the hemorrhage was stopped, and William was undressed and put to bed. The doctor said, "He mustn't get up tomorrow."
"You lie in bed tomorrow and try to get up your strength. You've overdone yourself today."
She had drawn his bed into the warmest corner, close by the fire, and had made up for herself a sort of bed by the window, where she might doze a bit, for she did not expect to get much sleep. She would have to be up and down many times to settle his pillows and give him milk or a little weak brandy and water. Night wore away, the morning grew into day, and about 12 o'clock he insisted on getting up. She tried to persuade him, but he said he could not stop in bed, and there was nothing for it but to ask Mrs. Collins to help her dress him. They placed him comfortably in a chair. The cough had entirely ceased, and he seemed better. And on Saturday night he slept better than he had done for a long while, and woke up on Sunday morning refreshed and apparently much stronger. He had a nice bit of boiled rabbit for his dinner. He didn't speak much. Esther fancied that he was still thinking of them. When the afternoon waned about 4 o'clock, he called Jack. He told him to sit in the light where he could see him, and he looked at his son with such wistful eyes. These farewells were very sad, and Esther had to turn aside to hide her tears.
"I should have liked to have seen you a man, Jack."
"Don't speak like that. I can't bear it," said the poor boy, bursting into tears. "Perhaps you won't die yet."
"Yes, Jack, I'm wore out. I can feel," he said, pointing to his chest, "that there is nothing here to live upon. It is the punishment come upon me."
"Punishment for what, father?"
"I wasn't always good to your mother, Jack."
"If to please me, William, you'll say no more."
"The boy ought to know. It will be a lesson for him, and it weighs upon my heart."
"I don't want my boy to hear anything bad about his father, and I forbid him to listen." The conversation paused, and soon after William said that his strength was going from him, and that he would like to go back to bed. Esther helped him off with his clothes, and together she and Jack lifted him into bed. He sat up looking at them with wistful, dying eyes.
"It is hard to part from you," he said. "If Chasuble had won, we would have all gone to Egypt. I could have lived out there."
"You must speak of them things no more. We all must obey God's will."
Esther dropped on her knees. She drew Jack down beside her, and William asked Jack to read something from the Bible. Jack read where he first opened the book, and when he had finished William said that he liked to listen. Jack's voice sounded to him like heaven. About 8 o'clock William bade his son good night.
"Good night, my boy. Perhaps we shan't see each other again. This may be my last night."
"I won't leave you, father."
"No, my boy. Go to your bed. I feel I'd like to be alone with mother."
The voice sank almost to a whisper.
"You'll remember what you promised me about racing. Be good to your mother. She's the best mother a son ever had."
"I'll work for mother, father. I'll work for her."
"You're too young, my son. But when you're older I hope you'll work for her. She worked for you. Good bye, my boy."
The dying man sweated profusely, and Esther wiped his face from time to time. Mrs. Collins came in. She had a large tin candlestick in her hand, in which there was a fragment of candle end. He motioned to her to put it aside. She put it on the table out of the way of his eyes.
"You'll help Esther to lay me out. I don't want anyone else. I don't like the other woman." "Esther and me will lay you out. Make your mind easy. None but we two shall touch you."
Once more Esther wiped his forehead, and he signed to her how he wished the bedclothes to be arranged, for he could no longer speak. Mrs. Collins whispered to Esther that she did not think that the end could be far off, and compelled by a morbid sort of curiosity, she took a chair and sat down. Esther wiped away the little drops of sweat as they came upon his forehead. His chest and throat had to be wiped also, for they too were full of sweat. His eyes were fixed on the darkness, and he moved his hand restlessly, and Esther always understood what he wanted. She gave him a little brandy and water, and when he could not take it from the glass, she gave it to him with a spoon. The silence grew more solemn, and the clock on the mantelpiece, striking 10 sharp strokes, did not interrupt it. And then, as Esther turned from the bedside for the brandy, Mrs. Collins's candle spluttered and went out. A little thread of smoke evaporated, leaving only a morsel of blackened wick. The flame had disappeared for ever, gone as if it had never been, and Esther saw darkness where there had been a light. Then she heard Mrs. Collins say,
"I think it's all over, dear."
The profile on the pillow seemed very little.
"Hold up his head, so that if there is any breath it may come on the glass."
"He's dead all right enough. You see, dear, there's not a trace of breath on the glass."
I'd like to say a prayer. Will you say a prayer with me?
Yes, I feel as if I should like to myself. It eases the heart wonderful.
End of chapter 44. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 45 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 45. She stood on the platform watching the receding train. A few bushes hid the curve of the line. The white vapour rose above them, evaporating in the grey evening. A moment more and the last carriage would pass out of sight. The white gate swung slowly forward and closed over the line. An oblong box painted reddish brown lay on the seat beside her. A woman of 7 or 8 and 30, stout and strongly built, short arms and hard-worked hands, dressed in dingy black skirt and a threadbare jacket too thin for the dampness of a November day. Her face was a blunt outline, and the grey eyes reflected all the natural prose of the Saxon. The porter told her that he would try to send her box up to Woodview to morrow. That was the way to Woodview, right up the lane. She could not miss it. She would find the lodge gate behind that clump of trees. And thinking how she could get her box to Woodview that evening, she looked at the barren strip of country lying between the downs and the shingle beach. The little town clamped about its deserted harbour seemed more than ever like falling to pieces like a derelict vessel. And when Esther passed over the level crossing she noticed that the line of little villas had not increased. They were as she had left them 18 years ago. Laurels, iron railing, antimacassars. It was about 18 years ago, on a beautiful June day, that she had passed up this lane for the first time. At the very spot she was now passing she had stopped to wonder if she would be able to keep the place of kitchen maid. She remembered regretting that she had not a new dress. She had hoped to be able to brighten up the best of her cotton prints with a bit of red ribbon. The sun was shining, and she had met William leaning over the paling in the avenue smoking his pipe. 18 years had gone by. 18 years of labour, suffering, disappointment. A great deal had happened, so much that she could not remember it all. The situations she had been in, her life with that dear good soul Miss Rice, then Fred Parsons, then William again, her marriage, the life in the public house, money lost and money won, heartbreakings, death, everything that could happen had happened to her. Now it all seemed like a dream, but her boy remained to her. She had brought up her boy, thank God. She had been able to do that. But how had she done it? How often had she found herself within sight of the workhouse? The last time was no later than last week. Last week it had seemed to her that she would have to accept the workhouse. But she had escaped, and now here she was back at the very point from which she started, going back to Woodview, going back to Mrs. Barfield's service. William's illness and his funeral had taken Esther's last few pounds away from her, and when she and Jack came back from the cemetery she found that she had broken into her last sovereign. She clasped him to her bosom. He was a tall boy of 15, and burst into tears. But she did not tell him what she was crying for. She did not say, "God only knows how we shall find bread to eat next week." She merely said, wiping away her tears, "We can't afford to live here any longer. It's too expensive for us now that father's gone."
and they went to live in a slum for 3 and 6pence a week. If she had been alone in the world she would have gone into a situation, but she could not leave the boy, and so she had to look out for charing. It was hard to have to come down to this, particularly when she remembered that she had a house and a servant of her own. But there was nothing for it but to look out for some charing, and get along as best she could until Jack was able to look after himself. But the various scrubbings and general cleaning that had come her way had been so badly paid that she soon found that she could not make both ends meet. She would have to leave her boy and go out as a general servant, and as her necessities were pressing, she accepted a situation in a coffee shop in the London Road. She would give all her wages to Jack, 7 shillings a week, and he would have to live on that. So long as she had her health she did not mind. It was a squat brick building with 4 windows that looked down on the pavement with a short-sighted stare. On each window was written in letters of white enamel, "Well-aired beds." A board nailed to a post by the side door announced that tea and coffee were always ready. On the other side of the sign was an upholsterer's, and the vulgar brightness of the Brussels carpets seemed in keeping with the slop-like appearance of the coffee house. Sometimes a workman came in the morning, a couple more might come in about dinner time. Sometimes they took rashers and bits of steak out of their pockets.
"Won't you cook this for me, missus?"
But it was not until about 9 in the evening that the real business of the house began, and it continued till 1, when the last straggler knocked for admittance. The house lived on its beds. The best rooms were sometimes let for 8 shillings a night, and there were 4 beds which were let at 4pence a night in the cellar, under the area where Esther stood by the great copper washing sheets, blankets, and counterpanes, when she was not cleaning the rooms upstairs. There was a double-bedded room underneath the kitchen, and over the landings, wherever a space could be found, the landlord, who was clever at carpentering work, had fitted up some sort of closet place that could be let as a bedroom. The house was a honeycomb. The landlord slept under the roof, and a corner had been found for his housekeeper, a handsome young woman at the end of the passage. Esther and the children, the landlord was a widower, slept in the coffee room upon planks laid across the tops of the high backs of the benches where the customers mealed. Mattresses and bedding were laid on these planks, and the sleepers lay, their faces hardly 2 feet from the ceiling. Esther slept with a baby, a little boy of 5. The 2 big boys slept at the other end of the room by the front door. The eldest was about 15, but he was only half-witted, and he helped in the housework, and could turn down the beds and see quicker than anyone if the occupant had stolen sheet or blanket. Esther always remembered how he would raise himself up in bed in the early morning, rub the glass, and light a candle, so that he could be seen from below. He shook his head if every bed was occupied, or signed with his fingers the prices of the beds if they had any to let. The landlord was a tall, thin man, with long features and hair turning grey. He was very quiet, and Esther was surprised one night at the abruptness with which he stopped a couple who were going upstairs.
"Is that your wife?"
he said. "Yes, she's my wife all right."
"She don't look very old."
"She's older than she looks." Then he said, half to Esther, half to his housekeeper, that it was hard to know what to do. If you asked them for their marriage certificates, they'd be sure to show you something. The housekeeper answered that they paid well, and that was the principal thing. But when an attempt was made to steal the bedclothes, the landlord and his housekeeper were more severe. As Esther was about to let a most respectable woman out of the front door, the idiot boy called down the stairs,
"Stop her! There's a sheet missing."
"Oh, what in the world is all this? I haven't got your sheet. Pray let me pass. I'm in a hurry."
"I can't let you pass until the sheet is found."
"You'll find it upstairs under the bed. It's got mislaid. I'm in a hurry."
"Call in the police," shouted the idiot boy.
"You'd better come upstairs and help me to find the sheet," said Esther.
The woman hesitated a moment, and then walked up in front of Esther. When they were in the bedroom she shook out her petticoats, and the sheet fell on the floor.
"There now," said Esther, "a nice botheration you'd have got me into. I should have had to pay for it."
"Oh, I could pay for it. It was only because I'm not very well off at present."
"Yes, you will pay for it if you don't take care," said Esther. It was very soon after that Esther had her mother's books stolen from her. They had not been doing much business, and she had been put to sleep in one of the bedrooms. The room was suddenly wanted, and she had no time to move all her things, and when she went to make up the room she found that her mother's books and a pair of jet earrings that Fred had given her had been stolen. She could do nothing. The couple who had occupied the rooms were far away by this time. There was no hope of ever recovering her books and earrings, and the loss of these things caused her a great deal of unhappiness. The only little treasure she possessed were those earrings. Now they were gone. She realized how utterly alone she was in the world. If her health were to break down to morrow she would have to go to the workhouse. What would become of her boy? She was afraid to think. Thinking did no good. She must not think, but must just work on, washing the bedclothes until she could wash no longer. Wash, wash all the week long, and it was only by working on till 1 o'clock in the morning that she sometimes managed to get the Sabbath free from washing. Never, not even in the house in Chelsea, had she had such hard work, and she was not as strong now as she was then. But her courage did not give way until one Sunday Jack came to tell her that the people who had employed him had sold their business. Then a strange weakness came over her. She thought of the endless week of work that awaited her in the cellar, the great copper on the fire, the heaps of soiled linen in the corner, the steam rising from the wash tub, and she felt she had not sufficient strength to get through another week of such work. She looked at her son with despair in her eyes. She had whispered to him as he lay asleep under her shawl, a tiny infant, "There is nothing for us, my poor boy, but the workhouse." And the same thought rose up in her mind as she looked at him, a tall lad with large grey eyes and dark curling hair. But she did not trouble him with her despair. She merely said, "I don't know how we shall pull through, Jack. God will help us." "You're washing too hard, mother. You're wasting away. Do you know no one, mother, who could help us?" She looked at Jack fixedly, and she thought of Mrs. Barfield. Mrs. Barfield might be away in the south with her daughter. If she were at Woodview, Esther felt sure she would not refuse to help her. So Jack wrote at Esther's dictation, and before they expected an answer, a letter came from Mrs. Barfield saying that she remembered Esther perfectly well. She had just returned from the south. She was all alone at Woodview, and wanted a servant. Esther could come and take the place if she liked. She enclosed £5, and hoped that the money would enable Esther to leave London at once. But this returning to former conditions filled Esther with strange trouble. Her heart beat as she recognized the spire of the church between the trees, and the undulating lines of downs behind the trees awakened painful recollections. She knew the white gate was somewhere in this plantation, but could not remember its exact position, and she took the road to the left instead of taking the road to the right, and had to retrace her steps. The gate had fallen from its hinge, and she had some difficulty in opening it. The lodge where the blind gatekeeper used to play the flute was closed. The park paling had not been kept in repair.
Wandering sheep and cattle had worn away the great holly hedge, and Esther noticed that in falling an elm had broken through the garden wall. When she arrived at the iron gate under the bunched evergreens her steps paused, for this was where she had met William for the first time. He had taken her through the stables and pointed out to her Silver Braid's box. She remembered the horses going to the downs, horses coming from the downs, stabling and the sound of hoofs everywhere. But now silence. She could see that many a roof had fallen, and that ruins of outhouses filled the yard. She remembered the kitchen windows bright in the setting sun, and the white-capped servants moving about the great white table. But now the shutters were up, nowhere a light, the knocker had disappeared from the door, and she asked herself how she was to get in. She even felt afraid. Supposing she should not find Mrs. Barfield? She made her way through the shrubbery, tripping over fallen branches and trunks of trees. Rooks rose out of the evergreens with a great clatter. Her heart stood still, and she hardly dared to tear herself through the mass of underwood. At last she gained the lawn, and, still very frightened, sought for the bell. The socket plate hung loose on the wire, and only a faint tinkle came through the solitude of the empty house. At last footsteps and a light. The chain door was opened a little, and a voice asked who it was. Esther explained. The door was opened, and she stood face to face with her old mistress. Mrs. Barfield stood holding the candle high, so that she could see Esther. Esther knew her at once. She had not changed very much. She kept her beautiful white teeth and her girlish smile. The pointed, vixen-like face had not altered in outline, but the reddish hair was so thin that it had to be parted on the side and drawn over the skull. Her figure was delicate and sprightly as ever. Esther noticed all this, and Mrs. Barfield noticed that Esther had grown stouter. Her face was still pleasant to see, for it kept that look of blunt, honest nature which had always been its charm. She was now the thick-set working woman of 40, and she stood holding the hem of her jacket in her rough hands. "We'd better put the chain up, for I'm alone in the house." "Aren't you afraid, ma'am?" "A little, but there's nothing to steal. I asked the policeman to keep a look out. Come into the library." There was the round table, the little green sofa, the piano, the parrot's cage, and the yellow painted presses, and it seemed only a little while since she had been summoned to this room, since she had stood facing her mistress, her confession on her lips. It seemed like yesterday, and yet 17 years and more had gone by, and all these years were now a sort of blur in her mind, a dream, the connecting links of which were gone, and she stood face to face with her old mistress in the old room. "You've had a cold journey, Esther. You'd like some tea?" "Oh, don't trouble, ma'am." "It's no trouble. I should like some myself. The fire's out in the kitchen. We can boil the kettle here." They went through the baize door into the long passage. Mrs. Barfield told Esther where was the pantry, the kitchen, and the larder. Esther answered that she remembered quite well, and it seemed to her not a little strange that she should know these things. Mrs. Barfield said, "So you haven't forgotten Woodview, Esther?" "No, ma'am. It seems like yesterday. But I'm afraid the damp has got into the kitchen, ma'am. The range is that neglected." "Ah, Woodview isn't what it was." Mrs. Barfield told how she had buried her husband in the old village church. She had taken her daughter to Egypt. She had dwindled there till there was little more than a skeleton to lay in the grave. "Yes, ma'am, I know how it takes them, inch by inch. My husband died of consumption." They sat talking for hours. One thing led to another, and Esther gradually told Mrs. Barfield the story of her life from the day they bade each other good bye in the room they were now sitting. "It's quite a romance, Esther." "It was a hard fight, and it isn't over yet, ma'am. It won't be over until I see him settled in some regular work. I hope I shall live to see him settled." They sat over the fire a long time without speaking. Mrs. Barfield said, "It must be getting on for bedtime." "I suppose it must, ma'am." She asked if she should sleep in the room she had once shared with Margaret Gale. Mrs. Barfield answered with a sigh that as all the bedrooms were empty, Esther had better sleep in the room next to hers. End of chapter 45. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 46 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 46. Esther seemed to have quite naturally accepted Woodview as a final stage. Any further change in her life she did not seem to regard as possible or desirable. One of these days her boy would get settled. He would come down now and again to see her. She did not want any more than that. No, she did not find the place lonely. A young girl might, but she was no longer a young girl. She had her work to do, and when it was done she was glad to sit down to rest. And dressed in long cloaks, the women went for walks together. Sometimes they went up the hill, sometimes into Southwick to make some little purchases. On Sundays they walked to Beeding to attend meeting. And they came home along the winter roads, the peace and happiness of prayer upon their faces, holding their skirts out of the mud, unashamed of their common boots. They made no acquaintances, seeming to find in each other all necessary companionship. Their heads bent a little forward, they trudged home, talking of what they were in the habit of talking: that another tree had blown down, that Jack was now earning good money, 10 shillings a week. Esther hoped it would last. Or else Esther told her mistress that she had heard that one of Mr. Arthur's horses had won a race. He lived in the north of England, where he had a small training stable, and his mother never heard of him except through the sporting papers. "He hasn't been here for 4 years," Mrs. Barfield said. "He hates the place. He wouldn't care if I were to burn it down to morrow. However, I do the best I can, hoping that one day he'll marry and come and live here." Mr. Arthur, that was how Mrs. Barfield and Esther spoke of him, did not draw any income from the estate. The rents only sufficed to pay the charges and the widow's jointure. All the land was let, the house he had tried to let, but it had been found impossible to find a tenant, unless Mr. Arthur would expend some considerable sum in putting the house and grounds into a state of proper repair. This he did not care to do. He said that he found race horses a more profitable speculation. Besides, even the park had been let on lease. Nothing remained to him but the house and lawn and garden. He could no longer gallop a horse on the hill without somebody's leave, so he didn't care what became of the place. His mother might go on living there, keeping things together, as she called it. He did not mind what she did as long as she didn't bother him. So did he express himself regarding Woodview on the rare occasion of his visits, and when he troubled to answer his mother's letters. Mrs. Barfield, whose thoughts were limited to the estate, was pained by his indifference. She gradually ceased to consult him, and when Beeding was too far for her walk She had the furniture removed from the drawing room, and a long deal table placed there instead. She had not asked herself if Arthur would object to her inviting a few brethren of the neighbourhood to her house for meeting, or publishing the meetings by notices posted on the lodge gate. One day Mrs. Barfield and Esther was walking in the avenue when, to their surprise, they saw Mr. Arthur open the white gate and come through. The mother hastened forward to meet her son, but paused dismayed by the anger that looked out of his eyes. He did not like the notices, and she was sorry that he was annoyed. She didn't think that he would mind them, and she hastened by his side pleading her excuses. But to her great sorrow Arthur did not seem to be able to overcome his annoyance. He refused to listen, and continued his reproaches, saying the things that he knew would most pain her. He did not care whether the trees stood or fell, whether the cement remained upon the walls or dropped from them. He didn't draw a penny of income from the place, and did not dare a damn what became of it. He allowed her to live there, she got her jointure out of the property, and he didn't want to interfere with her. But what he could not stand was the snuffy little folk from the town coming round his house. The Barfields at least were county, and he wished Woodview to remain county as long as the walls held together. He wasn't a bit ashamed of all this ruin. You could receive the Prince of Wales in a ruin, but he wouldn't care to ask him into a dissenting chapel. Mrs. Barfield answered that she didn't see how the mere assembling of a few friends in prayer could disgrace a house. She did not know that he objected to her asking them. She would not ask them any more. The only thing was that there was no place nearer than Beeding where they could meet, and she could no longer walk so far. She would have to give up meeting.
It seems to me a strange taste to want to kneel down with a lot of little shopkeepers. Is this where you kneel?" he said, pointing to the long deal table. "The place is a regular little Bethel." "Our Lord said that when a number should gather together for prayer that he would be among them. Those are true words, and as we get old we feel more and more the want of this communion of spirit. It is only then that we feel that we really with God. The folk that you despise are equal in his sight, and living here alone, what should I be without prayer? And Esther, after her life of trouble and strife, what would she be without prayer? It's our consolation." "I think you could choose one's company for prayer as for everything else. Besides, what do you get out of it? Miracles don't happen nowadays."
"You're very young, Arthur, and you cannot feel the want of prayer as we do. Two old women living in this lonely house. As age and solitude overtake us, the realities of life float away, and we become more and more sensible to the mystery which surrounds us. And our Lord Jesus Christ gave us love and prayer so that we might see a little further." An expression of great beauty came upon her face, that unconscious resignation which, like the twilight, hallows and transforms. In such moments the humblest hearts are at one with nature, and speaks out of the eternal wisdom of things. So even this common racing man was touched, and he said,
"I'm sorry if I said anything to hurt your religious feelings."
Mrs. Barfield did not answer.
"Do you not accept my apologies, mother?"
"My dear boy, what do I care for your apologies? What are they to me? All I think of now is your conversion to Christ. Nothing else matters. I shall always pray for that."
"You may have whom you like up here. I don't mind if it makes you happy. I'm ashamed of myself. Don't let's say any more about it. I'm only down for the day. I'm going home to-morrow."
"Home, Arthur? This is your home?"
I can't bear to hear you speak of any other place as your home." "Well, mother, then I shall say that I am going back to business to morrow."
Mrs. Barfield sighed. End of chapter 46. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 47 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 47. Days, weeks, months passed away, and the two women came to live more and more like friends, and less like mistress and maid. Not that Esther ever failed to use the respectful "ma'am" when she addressed her mistress, nor did they ever sit down to a meal at the same table. But these slight social distinctions, which habit naturally preserved, and which it would have been disagreeable to both to forego, were no check on the intimacy of their companionship. In the evening they sat in the library sewing, or Mrs. Barfield read aloud, or they talked of their sons. On Sundays they had their meetings. The folk came from quite a distance, and sometimes as many as 25 knelt round the deal table in the drawing room. And Esther felt that these days were the happiest of her life. She was content in the peaceful present, and she knew that Mrs. Barfield would not leave her unprovided for. She was almost free from anxiety. But Jack did not seem to be able to obtain regular employment in London, and her wages were so small that she could not help him much. So the sight of his handwriting made her tremble, and she sometimes did not show the letter to Mrs. Barfield for some hours after. One Sunday morning, after meeting, as the two women were going for their walk up the hill, Esther said, "I've a letter from my boy, ma'am. I hope it is to tell me that he's got back to work."
"I'm afraid I shan't be able to read it, Esther. I haven't my glasses with me."
"It don't matter, ma'am. It'll keep."
"Give it to me. His writing is large and legible. I think I can read it. My dear mother, the place I told you of in my last letter was given away, so I must go on in the toy shop till something better turns up. I only get 6 shillings a week and my tea, and can't quite manage on that."
"Then something, pay 3 and 6pence a week, something bed, something." "I know, ma'am. He shares a bed with the eldest boy."
"Yes, that's it, and he wants to know if you can help him. I don't like to trouble you, mother, but it is hard for a boy to get his living in London."
"But I've sent him all my money. I shan't have any till next quarter."
"I'll lend you some, Esther. We can't leave the boy to starve. He can't live on 2 and 6pence a week."
"You're very good, ma'am, but I don't like to take your money. We shan't be able to get the garden cleared this winter."
"We shall manage somehow, Esther."
"The garden must wait. The first thing to do is to see that your boy doesn't want for food." The women resumed their walk up the hill. When they reached the top, Mrs. Barfield said,
"I haven't heard from Mr. Arthur for months. I envy you, Esther, those letters asking for a little money. What's the use of money to us except to give it to our children? Helping others, that is the only happiness."
At the end of the combe, under the shaws, stood the old red-tiled farmhouse in which Mrs. Barfield had been born. Beyond it downlands rolled on and on, reaching half-way up the northern sky. Mrs. Barfield was thinking of the days when her husband used to jump off his cob and walk beside her through those gorse patches on his way to the farmhouse. She had come from the farmhouse beneath the shaws to go to live in an Italian house sheltered by a fringe of trees. That was her adventure. She knew it, and she turned from the view of the downs to the view of the sea. The plantations of Woodview touched the horizon, then the line dipped, and between the top branches of a row of elms appeared the roofs of the town. Over a long spider-legged bridge a train wriggled like a snake, the bleak river flowed into the harbour, and the shingle banks saved the low land from inundation. Then the train passed behind the square dogmatic tower of the village church. Her husband lay beneath the chancel. Her father, mother, all her relations lay in the churchyard. She would go up there in a few years. Her daughter lay far away in Egypt. Upon this downland all her life had been passed, all her life except the few months she had spent by her daughter's bedside in Egypt. She had come down from that combe, from that farmhouse beneath the shaws, and had only crossed the down. And this barren landscape meant as much to Esther as to her mistress. It was on these downs that she had walked with William. He had been born and bred on these downs, but he lay far away in Brompton Cemetery. It was she who had come back, and in her simple way she too wondered at the mystery of destiny. As they descended the hill, Mrs. Barfield asked Esther if she ever heard of Fred Parsons. "No, ma'am, I don't know what's become of him."
And if you were to meet him again, would you care to marry him?"
"Marry, and begin life all over again? All the worry and bother over again? Why should I marry? All I live for now is to see my boy settled in life." The women walked on in silence, passing by long ruins of stables, coach houses, granaries, rickyards, all in ruin and decay. The women paused and went towards the garden, and removing some pieces of the broken gate, they entered a miniature wilderness. The espalier apple trees had disappeared beneath climbing weeds, and long briars had shot out from the bushes, leaving few traces of the former walks, a damp, dismal place that the birds seemed to have abandoned. Of the greenhouse only some broken glass and a black broken chimney remained. A great elm had carried away a large portion of the southern wall, and under the dripping trees an aged peacock screamed for his lost mate.
"I don't suppose that Jack will be able to find any more paying employment this winter. We must send him 6 shillings a week. That with what he is earning will make 12. He'll be able to live nicely on that."
"I should think he would indeed. But then, what about the wages of them who was to have cleared the garden for us?"
"We shan't be able to get the whole garden cleared, but Jim will be able to get a piece ready for us to sow some spring vegetables. Not a large piece, but enough for us. The first thing to do will be to cut down those apple trees. I'm afraid we shall have to cut down that walnut. Nothing could grow beneath it. Did anyone ever see such a mass of weed and briar? Yes, it is only about 10 years since we left Woodview, and the garden was let run to waste. Nature does not take long, a few years, a very few years."
End of chapter 47. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 48 of Esther Waters. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 48. All the winter the north wind roamed on the hills. Many trees fell in the park, and at the end of February Woodview seemed barer and more desolate than ever. Broken branches littered the roadway, and the tall trunks showed their wounds. The women sat over their fire in the evening listening to the blast, cogitating the work that awaited them as soon as the weather showed signs of breaking. Mrs. Barfield had laid by a few pounds during the winter, and the day that Jim cleared out the first piece of espalier trees she spent entirely in the garden, hardly able to take her eyes off him. But the pleasure of the day was in a measure spoiled for her by the knowledge that on that day her son was riding in the great steeplechase. She was full of fear for his safety. She did not sleep that night, and hurried down at an early hour to the garden to ask Jim for the newspaper which he had told him to bring her. He took some time to extract the paper from his torn pocket.
"He isn't in the first three," said Mrs. Barfield. "I always know that he is safe if he's in the first three. We must turn to the account of the race to see if there were any accidents."
She turned over the paper.
"Thank God he is safe," she said. "His horse ran fourth."
"You worry yourself without cause, ma'am. A good rider like him don't meet with accidents."
"The best riders are often killed, Esther. I never have any easy moment when I hear he's going to ride in these races. Supposing one day I were to read that he was carried back on a shutter."
"We mustn't let our thoughts run on such things, ma'am. If a war was to break out tomorrow, what should I do? His regiment would be ordered out. It is sad to think that he had to enlist. But, as he said, he couldn't go on living on me any longer, poor boy. We must keep on working, doing the best we can for them. There are all sorts of chances, and we can only pray that God may spare them."
"Yes, Esther, that's all we can do. Work on to the end. But your boy is coming to see you today."
"Yes, ma'am. He'll be here by 12 o'clock."
"You're luckier than I am. I wonder if I shall ever see my boy again."
"Yes, ma'am, of course you will. He'll come back to you right enough one of these days. There's a good time coming, that's what I always says. And now I've got work to do in the house. Are you going to stop here, or are you coming in with me? It'll do you no good standing about in the wet clay."
Mrs. Barfield smiled and nodded, and Esther paused at the broken gate to watch her mistress, who stood superintending the clearing away of 10 years' growth of weeds, as much interested in the prospect of a few peas and cabbages as in former days she had been in the culture of expensive flowers. She stood on what remained of a gravel walk, the heavy clay clinging to her boots, watching Jim piling weeds upon his barrow. Would he be able to finish the plot of ground by the end of the week? What should they do with that grey walnut tree? Nothing would grow underneath it. Jim was afraid that he would not be able to cut it down and remove it without help. Mrs. Barfield suggested sawing away some of the branches, but Jim was not sure that the expedient would prove of much avail. In his opinion the tree took all the goodness out of the soil, and that while it stood they could not expect a very great show of vegetables. Mrs. Barfield asked if the sale of the tree trunk would indemnify her for the cost of cutting it down. Jim paused in his work, and leaning on his spade, considered if there was any one in the town who for the sake of the timber would cut the tree down and take it away for nothing. There ought to be some such person in town, if it came to that. Mrs. Barfield ought to receive something for the tree. Walnut was a valuable wood, was extensively used by cabinet makers, and so on, until Mrs. Barfield begged him to get on with his digging. At 12 o'clock Esther and Mrs. Barfield walked out on the lawn. A loud wind came up from the sea, and it shook the evergreens as if it were angry with them. A rook carried a stick to the tops of the tall trees, and the women drew their cloaks about them. The train passed across the vista, and the women wondered how long it would take Jack to walk from the station. Then another rook stooped to the edge of the plantation, gathered a twig, and carried it away. The wind was rough. It caught the evergreens underneath and blew them out like umbrellas. The grass had not yet begun to grow, and the grey sea harmonized with the grey-green land. The women waited on the windy lawn, their skirts blown against their legs, keeping their hats on with difficulty. It was too cold for standing still. They turned and walked a few steps towards the house, and then looked round. A tall soldier came through the gate. He wore a long red cloak, and a small cap jauntily set on the side of his close-clipped head. Esther uttered a little exclamation, and ran to meet him. He took his mother in his arms, kissed her, and they walked towards Mrs. Barfield together. All was forgotten in the happiness of the moment, the long fight for his life, and the possibility that any moment might declare him to be mere food for powder and shot. She was only conscious that she had accomplished her woman's work. She had brought him up to man's estate, and that was her sufficient reward. What a fine fellow he was! She did not know he was so handsome, and blushing with pleasure and pride, she glanced shyly at him out of the corners of her eyes as she introduced him to her mistress. "This is my son, ma'am." Mrs. Barfield held out her hand to the young soldier. "I have heard a great deal about you from your mother." "And I of you, ma'am. You've been very kind to my mother. I don't know how to thank you." And in silence they walked towards the house. End of chapter 48, and end of the book Esther Waters by George Moore. Read by Lars Rolander. Thank you for listening.